started with the City Council meeting for February 13th, 2012. Call this meeting to order. Chief Rothis, do you want to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, changes to the order agenda. Mr. Maltby?
No changes to the order this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Rubens, report from closed session.
Excuse me, there's no reportable items from closed session.
Okay, and we are going to go to council appointments and presentations. First, we have a presentation of proclamation honoring Eric P. Stanley upon his retirement from the police department. So we'll come right up front. You better? Thank you. Chief Rothis, if you want to join us up here as well. Thank you. Chief, get up here. So we have a proclamation here for you, Eric. Upon his retirement from the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, San Carlos Bureau, and I'm going to read the whereases because it's a pretty impressive career. Whereas Sergeant Eric Stanley has faithfully served the community of San Carlos after graduating from San Carlos High School as a Level 1 Reserve Police Officer from January 1983 to September 1986. And whereas Eric Stanley was hired as a police officer with the Burlingame Police Department, serving the community from September 86 to June 1994. Eric then transferred to the Hayward Police Department, where he served the community from June 1994 to February 2007, and where he became a court-certified gang expert and a member of the Homicide Task Force. Whereas Eric Stanley has excelled in over 30 different areas of policing, including FTO, SWAT, dignitary protection, counter-sniper, EVOC instructor, police bicycle training instructor, gang investigations, organized crime, and ABC enforcement. Whereas Eric Stanley returned to the San Carlos Police Department and was subsequently promoted to sergeant in 2007, providing a critical leadership role in the assimilation of the former San Carlos PD into the Sheriff's Office. Eric Stanley's strong and capable leadership was instrumental in helping to ensure a successful merger of the two organizations. He worked effectively with members of his patrol team to professionally police his community and build confidence in the Sheriff's Office at a critical time. Now, therefore, I, Andy Klein, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, do hereby commend Sergeant Eric P. Stanley for his contributions and dedication to the citizens of San Carlos and for his commitment in serving the public. We thank you for your years of distinguished service and wish you well in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
And I wanted Chief Rothis to be up here so he could talk a little bit about working with you, since you guys have had a professional career together.
Thank you, Mayor. Just the proclamation says it all, but I really want to point out kind of the end, and what sticks out to me with Sergeant Stanley was a transition from the police department to the Sheriff's Office. An extremely difficult time for all members of the organization, and Eric, no less for Eric. It was a very difficult time. But at some point, the City Council had to make a decision that they felt was in the long-term best interest of this community. They decided to contract with the sheriff. That was difficult for Eric and everybody. But when that decision took place, Eric stepped up as a leader in the organization. Eric helped smooth that transition before it occurred, helped instill confidence in the rank and file that this would be okay. He looked out to make sure that they were treated fairly, and you were able to stomp out rumors and just to help shepherd through the process. And then after the transition, when we took over at the Sheriff's Office, again, it was a difficult time. Eric stepped up to be a leader to make sure that he did everything within his power to make sure that this contract would be successful, that the Sheriff's Office would be successful in this community, and that is really what it means to be a consummate professional, to be able to stand up in difficult times, to be a leader, and to make it work, and that's what Eric did. So I congratulate you and respect you for that.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we are going to discuss and appoint a council ad hoc subcommittee to work with staff on the city's citywide parking study. Mr. Maltby, do you want to take this, or shall I?
I can go either way here.
You can go for it.
Okay. Last week, as I was discussing the current parking study that the council's authorized staff to do, it occurred to me, based on some questions that we've gotten from the community and council members, that it would be beneficial for us to have an ad hoc council committee for this parking master plan study. I called the mayor, ran the idea by him, talked to a couple members of the council who I thought, based on some of their previous comments and questions and discussions we've had, might be of interest, and gave the mayor a couple of names that I would recommend serving on the council, which would be Vice Mayor Grocott and Councilmember Mark Olbert. So with the council's blessing, I'd ask that you form that subcommittee with those members so that we can begin meeting with them as we move the project forward.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, Mr. Maltby, I was not paying attention.
You recommended Councilmember Olbert and Vice Mayor Grocott
Okay.
on the committee.
Do we need a motion for that, Mr. Maltby?
Yeah, I think a motion would be appropriate.
Okay, can we get a motion from
Mr.
the council?
Mayor, assuming the gentlemen don't mind serving, I would make a motion that we approve Vice Mayor Grocott and Councilmember Olbert to serve on the subcommittee for a citywide parking study.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item number 5, council communications and announcements. We'll start with you, Mr. Olbert.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually only have one item to report on, which is the Emergency Services Council meeting. I attended one meeting with them, and they are looking basically to decide whether or not they're going to spread a little bit of cost savings they have in their budget over future years and sort of smooth out the expected increases in charges that will be coming through to the member agencies.
Okay. Mr. Grisilli?
You want us to go?
Yeah, you can go until you're done your little row if you'd like to.
Okay, well, I didn't know
Yeah,
you wanted
that's
to do
fine.
that, if there were other community items.
Well, you can bring those up as well.
Okay, I don't have the community item, but listed here, the Association of Bay Area Governments, and we have not really had, in the last, I'd say 3 or 4 months, I did serve on a panel considering with sustainability and the greening of the Bay Area about 3 or 4 months ago on that. Relative to the City and County Association of Governments, we have a monthly meeting with 20, let me rephrase that, with a member from each of the 20 cities and the county in San Mateo County. We just had one the other evening. Mostly the City and County Association of Governments handles transportation, and we were notified that our executive director and staff had garnered for us a $7.5 million grant from the state, which will be used for the new project that we're working on throughout the county to identify travel if there's an emergency going on. In other words, if there's an emergency going on and streets are closed and roads are closed, there's going to be a process so that people can get around, and there'll be notification of that. Let's see, what else did we do there? And I think that basically, that was the highlight of the other evening. And the last is the South Bayside System Authority, which is the sewer district. We are in the process of building a brand-new plant at the end of Radio Road in Redwood Shores. The sewer district covers Belmont, San Carlos, Redwood City, and West Bay, which would be Atherton, East Palo Alto, Menlo Park area, and unincorporated, I believe, down in the county area down there. We are on track. Right now, we're building the administration building. We're a little bit behind on that, but we're still under budget on almost all the projects that we're working on, and just moving along to make it a more efficient 21st century plan and to allow for growth in the cities, and to maintain that we have not had any leaks in our water system that some other districts have had. We haven't had any down at the South Bayside plant. Other than that, that's about it.
Okay, so I'll go next. Some of these I actually sit on with Mr. Collins, so we can knock those off really quick. The Belmont St. Carlos Fire Department and 2+2 Committee, we haven't met since the new year. I imagine the 2+2 Committee will be a little slow going off the ground since they have 2 new board members, or actually 3 new board members. And Belmont St. Carlos Fire Department is going to meet very unscheduled. We'll have meetings as we need them, but I imagine it's going to be less than quarterly. And then lastly, Mr. Collins will report on the Peninsula Congestion Relief Alliance. He pinch hit for me on that meeting. And then the San Mateo County Library Governing Board, we just did the financial audit, and the county library system is running about $1 million deficit, give or take. We're going to look into it in budget time. They're currently going to go into negotiations with their SEIU negotiating unit, and there are 2 new libraries that are being proposed, one in Pacifica and one in Atherton. Is that right, Ms. Boland?
That's correct.
Yeah, so those 2 are going to go through the planning process, and we should have 2 new libraries in the county in the next handful of years. And the only other announcement I have is on February 26th, the annual Friends of San Carlos Adult Community Center is going to be having their crab feed. Doors open at 4:30 p.m. and dinner will be served at 5:30. Tickets are available for $39 at the Adult Community Center front desk. Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I did go to the Peninsula Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance. There wasn't a whole lot of business. Supervisor Dave Pine was there, and there was a discussion of the shuttle system in the county, or lack thereof, and also serving the underserved or redoing bus routes to serve the underserved areas of the county. And they also appointed a new executive director who happens to be the former CEO, I believe, of the Millbrae Chamber of Commerce, and I apologize, I forgot his name. I think his first name was Ken, but I don't remember his name. That's it.
Mr. Grocott.
I see here listed the airport roundtable, and we have not met as of yet since I was appointed. But I also wanted to point out, if this is to be an exhaustive list, there's 2 on here that are not listed. The Airport Land Use Commission, ALUC, which I sit on as well, and the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which I'm on that as well as chair.
Okay, we'll make sure those go on the list. Do you have any reports for those?
No, we haven't met.
Okay, perfect. So we'll move on then to item number 6, public comment. Persons wish to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so. I don't have any comment slips for public comment. Yes, sir, you can come on up, and after you're done, you can give a comment slip to our city clerk.
Mayor and City Council, my name is Dave Morrison. We are located at 400 Industrial Road, own the building and operate Morrison School Supplies. I just wanted to bring to your attention that as the PANF project begins to move forward here, that we've been involved in that process. As you know, it's been a long-term process, and I just want staff and council to remember that there's a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, a lot of input that we had. There are a lot of decisions that still yet to be made along that project. I just want to make sure that we're continue to be involved in that project as it moves along, and anything it may potentially affect us. Our main concerns are that we're able to continue to conduct our business as we have for 30 plus years there, and main things are parking and traffic and access in and out of property, but there's other things getting into undergrounding utilities, stuff like that. So that's all I just wanted to raise their attention, since it's a lot of time have passed and some of these meetings are years ago. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 7, approval of consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. Does anyone wish to remove any items?
I do.
Yes.
Item G from Mr. Grocott.
And, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to remove items C and D.
C and D. Okay. So we will entertain a motion for the remaining items.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve items 7A, B, E, F, H, and H, I guess I, or 1, however it's listed
And we
there.
have to introduce that ordinance, correct? So can
Yeah,
we?
you need to read the title of
Okay.
I.
Well, why don't I do that then? I'll read that. In the process of my motion, introduces ordinance number
1441.
1441, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, authorizing an amendment to the contract between the City Council of the City of San Carlos and the Board of Administration of the California Public Employees Retirement System. Anyway, that includes my motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay, moving on. Mr. Olbert, item 7C. Deny claim of Edith Johnson Trust.
Mr. Mayor, I'd actually be happy to act on those 2 items together if that would save some time.
Okay.
I just have a clarification question for staff on items 7C and 7D, which is what is in fact the precise nature of, or what does it mean for us to be voting to approve those items?
Okay. It's routine for the city council to take an action in terms of denying liability claims presented to the city. That starts the statute of limitations running. It's one of the best practices recommended by ABAG Plan, our insurance liability pool. It by no means ends our discussions on individual claims with claimants through the city staff and the ABAG Plan staff. So we continue to work with them to identify the cause of claims, particularly sewer claims. If the city is at fault, if we find through our professional analysis that the backflow, say, occurred within the city's sewer main, we would, of course, look for ways to settle the lawsuit despite the denial. That's the history of these particular items with the city council.
Thank you.
Is there a motion then?
Yes, I'll move that we approve items 7C and 7D.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay, moving on then to item 7G, Mr. Grocott.
So the reason I pulled this item, this is the authorizing the mayor to send a letter to the California High-Speed Rail Authority on the partially revised draft program EIR and alternative four-track overhead design. And I noticed that our letter, of course, addresses the situation in San Carlos and brings up the fact that we had submitted some ideas and some plans for how we'd like to see that system, if it ever happens, go through the city of San Carlos. But there was no comment on our part relative to other environmental consequences and the potential loss of traffic lanes parallel to the Caltrain right-of-way along the San Francisco Peninsula. And I thought the council might be interested in that. I certainly am. I read some of the other areas where it's talking about removal of existing traffic lanes. And, you know, we're all part of that, of the peninsula community. And myself, when I read about these streets that or the roadways they're talking about closing, I don't know what the other cities have planned for those, but I certainly would think we might want to say something in support of having something done, if anything's going to be done, to keep these traffic lanes in place and to support those cities if that's what their intent is as well.
Okay, so this is kind of a policy discussion then. Mr. Moore, I don't think we're going to need you for this one.
Okay, fair.
Unless anyone wants to chime in, I have some thoughts. Mainly, I think we were asked to send a letter from the city of San Carlos, and I understand the other cities have all been asked to send those as well. Since we don't know what their responses are to their possible lane closures, I don't think it's proper for us to chime in because they may, A, be okay with it, B, be adamantly against it, but it really comes down to the fact that we don't know, and that's the responsibility of their city councils. I know it's a little bit of a chicken or an egg, but every council is doing this up and down the rail corridor right now, and it's not like we can get a report that says this is what they've all said. Now you guys can send a letter. We can only deal with the issues that we have at hand, and I think that we need to focus on San Carlos. This is a letter coming from the city of San Carlos about the effects of high-speed rail in San Carlos. I don't think we need to broaden our approach.
Is there any other?
If I may, I was just going to add, I remember when this item had come up before, we had some discussion about this, and Councilmember Grocott, I certainly share some of the concerns that you were talking about. My sense was that we were actually responding to a fairly narrow request, which was on two very specific things. Having said that, I mean, I certainly wouldn't object to putting in some language that talked about the importance of mitigating those kind of impacts and making sure, if they're temporary impacts, and making sure that any kind of permanent impacts are addressed and dealt with. It technically isn't, I don't think that's within the scope of what we were asked to comment on, but if there was some brief language in there that sort of highlighted that as an issue and said it was a source of potential concern for us, I'd be fine with that, but I'd also be okay if we don't, if my colleagues don't want to proceed that route too.
So I have a question then. Who I'm hearing the terminology being said, what we were asked to comment on. Who asked us to comment on what?
Well, Mr. Moore, that's a staff question because you can explain that far better than any of us.
Okay. The purpose for the suggested letter, and we talked about it a little bit at your January meeting, was that we've had a couple occasions now, this being the second time, that high-speed rail has issued either alternatives analysis or EIRs that don't mention the fact that high-speed rail, Caltrain, and San Carlos designed an alternative designed to eliminate the lane impact in San Carlos. And so in talking to Caltrain and high-speed rail and HNTB, which are the engineers that designed the alternative, I think everybody in those three groups acknowledges that that plan was designed by everybody, that it is their intent, either during Caltrain electrification or at a future report of high-speed rail, to put this in. I think it's fair to say that this was staff-generated primarily because we don't want this to get lost in the shuffle as these various reports come out and as the project kind of bounces back and forth, as we'll talk about later tonight, between these two groups. You don't have to send this letter if you don't want, but I think it's in the city's interest to do so, just so that it's included for the first time officially in the project documentation. The other comment I'd make, too briefly, in response to some of the comments on the dais about the lane closures, is I should mention that during the end of, or towards the end of the high-speed rail project, we met with both the cities of Belmont and Redwood City about their lane loss, and they didn't seem concerned about it. Now, I don't know whether that position has evolved, but it does, and that was the reason, frankly, we didn't, similar to the comments from the mayor, that we didn't include in this letter one way or another any comments on non-San Carlos lane closures, because we don't know what their current thinking is.
Okay, Mr. Marsilli?
I think I'd probably come down on the side of the mayor on this one, owing to the fact that this is the first of 5 million letters that we're going to be going back and forth. And would I be alive if this ever happens? I'm not really sure.
I hope so,
So
Bob.
it's just I think we should stick to what we need to do in our city at the moment. I think there's going to be an enormous amount of time, years possibly, to get together and all come around the other side. So I just send this one out, and then we'll get ready for the next one in a few months or a few weeks.
Mr. Collins, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm fine with the letter.
Okay, can we get a motion then?
Make a motion to approve item 7G.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes?
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 8, reports to council. Reports to council are updates on key city projects by city department heads and staff and city council subcommittees. They're informal or informational in nature, and no action will be taken on these items at this meeting. First up, we have results of South Bayside Waste Management Authority audit and update on audits of Recology and South Bay Recycling. Mr. Mora.
Thank you, Mayor and members of Council. Council will recall that both during the draft report on the 2012 rates and then again at the rate study, there was some interest in the various audits that are conducted each year by SBWMA, both in terms of their finances and also in terms of the two vendors. Essentially, the way that garbage and recycling services work in San Carlos and in the south part of the county is there are two vendors, Recology, that does the solid waste and recycling collection, and South Bay Recycling, which actually runs the Shoreway recyclery and transfer station for SBWMA. And so tonight we're bringing to you for information 3 documents that relate to that request. The first is the annual audited financial statements prepared by LSL for SBWMA. And you'll note in the staff report that SBWMA receives a clean bill of health on their financials. The next audit is an audit that was started in September and is due to be completed in either March or April, so it's coming right up. And this is a comprehensive audit of both South Bay Recycling and Recology in terms of their contractor data, their records, their systems, their reports, their customer service call center. This was done in response to some questions by the SBWMA board members in terms of now that we have 2 new contractors as of the first of this year, there was a desire to do a comprehensive review of their operations. And so that audit is forthcoming, and wanted to bring that to your attention. And then the third audit, which is sort of an extension of the second one, is to dig deeper into the financial activities of both of the 2 new providers. And that particular audit is scheduled to start this month and is scheduled to be completed by May. In addition, both companies have to provide their audited financials to SBWMA. I don't have those yet, but if the council's interested, we can transmit those to you as well. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, and you'll see is attachment 2 in the report, is we have a series of sections of the San Carlos franchise that I've excerpted with the help of SBWMA staff, which shows the various activities of Recology that the city can audit if you choose. These are things that you can do this year or any year during the 10 years of the franchise agreement. Staff's feeling on this particular item is that it might be best to first see what the 2 SBWMA audits tell us about Recology and South Bay Recycling, and see if that's sufficient to address the questions or concerns the council may have. If it is, we can leave it there. If it is not, we always have the opportunity to conduct further audits of either or both of these firms as outlined in attachment 2. So those are kind of the highlights of the materials that you have before you tonight in terms of the 3 audits so far.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. Are there any questions? Mr. Grocott? Okay. Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Moore, my recollection wasn't up on the dais at the time. I was in the audience when this item was last discussed, the contract in December. It seemed to me that many of the questions that were being fielded actually, or being raised, were what I would call kind of an operational nature. And I wasn't clear from reading the material and from what you just said to what extent the current ongoing audits were actually going to address some of those, or how deeply they were going to address them.
Yeah, and I guess the answer is it's a little of both. The audits of Recology, for example, are going to go into their customer service operation and their call center in particular. In fact, I actually talked to one of the folks at Cascadia, who is the subcontractor who's auditing that portion of the Recology operation, and she indicated that she's spending some time in their call center, and that's going to be a feature of this report. So that might be of particular interest. I should also mention that even though it is not required under the franchise, that I'm requiring Recology to meet with myself and city staff monthly. We've been doing that since January. They've suggested to me that they think things are going well enough that we can stop, and I've suggested to them I don't think so quite yet. So we're doing that operation as well. Not quite an audit per se, but let's say we're watching them closely.
Just out of curiosity, as part of those discussions, are you addressing issues, some of the ones that we heard about with like cans being knocked over? Or,
yes.
So that's the kind of thing.
We're doing that. We're also talking with them about the new mandatory commercial recycling ordinance, and we're talking to them about basically all service calls that we get, and anything that's of a nature. Also includes, for example, the upcoming composting events and e-waste and other things. So anything related to relations between the city and Recology, we touch upon monthly. And as I said, I've indicated to them that maybe in a few more months, if things go really well, we can maybe go less frequently. But so far, I'm not ready to go there yet. So
I just comment. I think your idea of waiting to see what the results of the current audits show and then feed into it the information you're getting from those discussions would probably be a good way to go forward on this. Although, if the questions aren't answered, we're going to have to dig a little deeper.
Okay. Mr. Grisilli?
I don't have any questions.
Mr. Collins?
I just got a couple. Is the city still getting a fair amount of complaints on Recology service?
The number has dropped, but we have a couple places where we have a couple residents where we hear from on multiple occasions, and those are the ones where we highlight with them. Obviously, when the calls come in, either Nakai or I will contact them directly. And generally speaking, if there's specific addresses that we see more than once, we'll usually bring it to the monthly meeting and get more, drill down to a little bit more to find out why, there are repeats. Mm-hmm. But the volume has certainly dropped off from what we saw in January. But, again, we're not done yet. Yeah.
No, I keep hearing just anecdotal things around town, there's
Yeah.
still complaints, but my question is, who should I tell them to call? Should I tell them to call you, or should I tell them to call Recology? What's the best way to approach that if somebody asks me? 'Cause
They can do it either way. We usually encourage them to call Recology first, and then if they don't get satisfaction, they can call us. But if someone's more comfortable calling us, that's fine too. We have a designated person at Recology, kind of our specialist, as it were, to make sure things happen. And I'm more than happy to make those phone calls if that's what we need. The other thing I would suggest to Councilmember Collins is, with all due respect to the garbage industry, having managed these franchises for many years now, it's rare that these sorts of issues ever go away, regardless of who the carrier is. And it just seems because there's so many thousands of contacts each month that no matter how well you automate the system or how well your drivers are trained, inevitably there's going to be a miss here or there. There's going to be a call. And so we tend to manage them and observe performance more compared to each other than necessarily a perfect record. Although I will say, I think the best garbage service I've seen here was when I first got here, and it was actually pre-BFI. It was when Lino Valbusa and his family owned the business. And not to pick on corporate companies, but it seemed that that family approach seemed to be the best I've ever seen, period. But as I said, I think this year Recology is doing better than we saw in January, but there's still some tweaking, let's say, that's needed.
Let me ask you one more. That just brings to mind another question. We've had, over the last 10, 15 years, how many garbage service companies in this town, would you say?
Well, in some respects, one could say that with the exception of the crossover in January, we've essentially had one, because like the cable industry, these companies tend to buy each other. So Lino's company was bought by BFI, that was bought by Allied, that was bought by Republic, et cetera. So it's kind of been the same operation. The other thing that's interesting is that when Allied bought BFI, they let go some of the people who now work for Recology. So it is kind of a small little industry, let's say.
I'm just wondering if we've had these sorts of adjustment issues in the past, if this is something that you've seen before and it sort of repeats itself when a new company takes over.
It has, and I think the most severe problems we had were clearly when Allied bought out BFI. And I think the reason for that is that Allied was a much smaller company than BFI, and frankly it appeared that they were using some of the cash proceeds from BFI's operation in this county and in other places to pay for their purchase. So one person in the industry referred to it as the guppy buying the whale. And it took us at least 6 months to even get the attention of Allied, and then they had to bring in company execs and fired the first management team, brought in a second management team, and it took us a long, long time. And frankly, that was the reason that the SBWMA board called for the RFP, because the service was so dreadful. I think that particular stretch when that transition happened was clearly the low point in service in this county. And over time, Allied got a bit better. I think Recology, given the major sea change with the new automated systems and the carts and all of that, they had a big changeover in January. But as I said, I'd have to rate the family operation the best, and the Allied BFI transition is the low point.
But this is the biggest technological change you've seen and the biggest systemic change. Is that a fair statement?
I think not only is that fair, but actually when we issued that RFP about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a trade publication in the solid waste industry that said it was the biggest RFP in the nation at the time. So it was a pretty major undertaking, to put it mildly.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Mr. Grocott.
Thank you. The first question I had was if you could just give an explanation to the council and somewhat for the sake of the audience, just the connection of what we call SBWMA to the garbage service in San Carlos and on the peninsula, because you've mentioned in your report, you talk about Recology a little bit, and then you talk about SBWMA. So if you could just clarify what the relationship is to garbage service.
Okay. As Vice Mayor Grocott indicates, there's a couple major players in this whole discussion. The South Bayside Waste Management Authority, also known as SBWMA, is a joint powers agency of 12 government agencies, including San Carlos. perhaps most significantly for this discussion, is in addition to helping the 12-member agencies manage the franchise during the year, they also own the Shoreway facility, both the transfer station and the recyclery. And it's the SBWMA that hires South Bay Recycling to own those to own and operate those two facilities. In the case of Recology, they do the garbage and recycling collection services, and they have individual franchise agreements with each of those 12 governing agencies. So the franchise agreement and the service agreement with Recology is not with the SBWMA, it's with each of the 12-member agencies, including the City of San Carlos. And that's why in Attachment 2, where you see the various audits that the city can do on its own, in addition to doing it through SBWMA, that's the reason for that language in the franchise. It's because it's a relationship between the city and Recology, not between SBWMA and Recology.
And so a follow-up question on that is, how does the status of SBWMA and their financial status and so forth as shown in this report, how does that impact, if at all, the garbage rates?
Well, the status of SBWMA, essentially, their operations are paid for in part by the recycling proceeds from the recyclery, and there is a component of the garbage rates that relates to the tipping fees and the garbage disposal costs. So essentially, the various agencies work with SBWMA, and a portion of their expenses are defrayed by the revenues that are made from the recycling.
Do we know what that nexus is? What percentage? Or
I don't know off the top of my head, no, but we can certainly.
That'd be an interesting number to look at, because I did take note when I read through this. My trade is not numbers like this, so I tend to look at things in a big picture sort of way. And the big picture I got looking at how SBWMA is doing is, their overall assets grew, I think, by 10% or something, and then their costs of running their operation went down by 5%. And I'm looking at that and asking myself, why is it then we're increasing our rates, almost 6% this year to our ratepayers, and that was only done because Mr. Grisilli had the idea that maybe we should go ahead and borrow some of the money for this year, in essence, and tack on the rate increase that was really supposed to be about 9% or 9.5% to a future year. So that's something I noticed, and that's why I asked the question. They're doing very well, and our ratepayers, when it comes to paying the garbage bill, are not doing so well.
Well, I guess to answer your comment, Vice Mayor, you are right in that what we are, in effect, doing by rolling over part of the rate increases, we're borrowing money from Recology, in effect, at an interest rate. And obviously, in the last rate study, as you probably recall, of the 8.9% revenue requirement, 7% of that 8.9 was because Recology's original estimate of what they thought it would cost to service San Carlos was too low when they bid it a couple years ago.
Say that again?
In the report we gave you a couple months ago on rates, we said that the shortfall was 8.9%, and of that number, 7 of the 8.9% was because Recology's original RFP response for San Carlos underestimated the actual cost of providing the service in San Carlos. And as you probably remember, there were some questions between Councilmember Grisilli and I believe it was Gino Gasparini from Recology where that came out, where essentially Mr. Gasparini and some of the Recology folks said that in many of the cities in the county that they came very close to between their RFP bid and what their actual costs were, but that was not the case in San Carlos. That this year most of the difference in terms of costs versus actuals were because they underestimated their costs. And now that they've been on the scene for several months, they now have actual costs after the first year.
Okay. I just have a couple more questions. I didn't notice the part that when I was reading through this, that we have this auditing that we can do, at least not that it would still be open to us that we could choose some of those. So I guess that still is open to us.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
one of the things that I've felt like, given some of the questions we get from citizens and so forth about how the service is and so forth, and then when we found out at the last time they were here that much of the cost is the rotation of the tires on the road and the lift of those trucks picking up garbage cans. That's how they essentially establish their cost of doing business. And when I considered that against what I see going on, at least in the part of town I live in, where they roll on my street at least 3 times a week, because they're doing, it appears as though they're going down the street for a single family, then they go down the street for business, and then they go down the street for multifamily. I don't know. All I know is I see them on my street 3 times a week. And so that's telling me their tires are rolling too often. The lifts would be the same, but the vehicles going by is too often. So here's my point.
Okay.
I would think an operational audit of Recology would be in order, because the contract we signed says we pay the cost and then a fixed profit of some kind, is my understanding. And yet we have no view of why the cost is what it is. And the only way to get that view of why the cost is what it is and audit be what it is by having an operational audit.
Well, a couple of comments, Vice Mayor. First of all, we could certainly check on your portion of the route to see why how the route is working.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Moore. I'm not asking for that. I'm just bringing up my street as an example. What was that word you used before? It's just anecdotal, exactly.
Right.
An anecdotal example. But please don't do just an audit on my street. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's do the whole system.
Right. Well, and I guess the point I was trying to get to was that my understanding, and because we have had some questions from the public about the way the routes go, is that in some cases the services, one route is, say, the right-hand side of the street, and the other route is, say, the left-hand side of the street, and they do that for both garbage collection and recycling. So in theory, and again, I don't have in front of me how the different routes work, but if that is indeed the case, it sounds like one could expect that in some parts of town, some streets, you might have, say, to use your example, 4 passes perhaps on a street, because you have the right-hand side pass, and that might not be the same day as the left-hand side pass for garbage, and then the same could occur for recycling.
Mr. Moore, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's not what Mr. Grocott is asking. He's asking if the availability for an operational audit is an actual availability. Is that in our contract? Do we have the right to call for an
That's right.
operational
Sure.
audit? I think that's where you guys are
That's
getting
what I'm
mixed up.
Sure. We do certainly, and although obviously we would have to pay for it, but we could do that, yes.
Okay, well, that's something we could talk about in February, at the end of this month when we get together, but I think he was more asking if that was available.
Okay, sure,
to us.
absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You got right to the point. The last question is just a curiosity more than anything, but I noticed the audit that we have before us was done by Lance, Soul, and Lunghard, and I'm just curious, is this a repeat performance for them? Have they been doing the audits for the last 5 years? So, and if not, just how often have they done these audits?
My understanding is that they are, since the city of San Carlos is the fiscal agent, that we were the ones that procured LSL, but I could perhaps ask Ms. Mendenhall, since she's the one that manages the financial portion of this, how often, et cetera.
Hi. Yes, LSL was, we contracted with them this year. This is their first year that they've done audits for us. Prior to this, we had Mays and Associates, who did the audits for SBWMA for the last 6 years.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, do you have any more questions, Mr. Grocott?
Oh, that's it. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you for your report, Ms. Moore. Okay, moving on to item 9, unfinished business. 9A is consideration of approving amendments to the city strategic plan and 6-month objective matrix. Mrs. Mendenhall.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Rebecca Mendenhall, Administrative Services Director. Before you tonight is an update on the strategic plan. This report will serve as the February 2012 monthly report and will be the final report before the Council will meet again at the next strategic retreat on Wednesday, February 29th. There are 9 requested revisions tonight. The first revision is to change the date to present to Council for possible direction sharing a fire station between San Carlos and the County of San Mateo from January 31st to February 27th. The next is to change the date for the tabletop exercise from February 15th to April. In April, the city will participate in a large, full-scale wildland fire exercise involving the central and south parts of the county, which will involve field personnel as well as the Emergency Operations Center staff. Next is to move the enrollment in San Mateo County Alert System from February 15th to be an ongoing objective. To date, we've achieved a 35% increase in enrollment since August and a 77% increase since March. Next is to change the date to present organizational alternatives for public works from February 15th to March 12th, and to move the feasibility study to share a courtyard with another jurisdiction from February 15th to a future date. Move the date to provide community education program regarding the city's new permitting system from February 15th to April. Although the system is live and is being used internally, we're holding off on the public outreach until the online permitting is fully functional. This is still pending additional testing. And move the date to present to Council the redesign of the website from February 15th to March 12th. This is the second phase of the website redesign project. The first phase was to update the skin and the site, or to change the colors and incorporate the branding, and that was done in November. The second phase will be to update the navigation, the calendar features, and quick links, and this is all based on feedback we've received from the community. And the final 2 amendments tonight are to move the date to present to City Council for action programs regarding styrofoam food containers from February 15th to February 27th, and the date to present to Council for action programs regarding the plastic shopping bags from February 15th to a future objective. Although these 2 items are on the agenda tonight for discussion and direction, the strategic plan items were to present to Council for action a proposed ordinance for consideration. In summary, there are 9 requested revisions and 31 completed objectives. The 31 completed objectives are outlined in the staff report in your packet. And as mentioned before, our next strategic plan retreat is scheduled for Wednesday, February 29th. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions from the council? Mr. Grocott?
I just was looking for a little more color on the moving the item on the courtyard, the change on that strategic plan item, if we could have some explanation on that.
Mr. Maltby?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in there. Some initial work's been done between the City of San Carlos and Redwood City using Management Partners as a joint consultant on the concept of a shared courtyard. Primarily, the City of Redwood City had an interest in sharing our courtyard facility, if at all possible. The initial study showed that there just wasn't enough real estate in our courtyard to make that happen. There's a potential second phase of this where we could look at expanding the courtyard. But we also, at sort of the tail end of that phase, the County of San Mateo got involved in possibly wanting to share a courtyard as well. And so we kind of gone back to the drawing board and expanded the number of courtyards that we're looking at within the general vicinity. So the project continues to move forward, but as we've expanded the number of players, it's moved a little bit slower.
Follow-up question.
Mr.
Is there any relation to the facilities report that is coming up in the future?
No, the facilities report in the future is really focused more on the current and future maintenance needs of our existing facilities. Now, if we were in the position down the road of looking to expand our courtyard, say, that would be an appropriate amendment perhaps to that report, but I think that would come later.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Mendenhall. Can we entertain a motion?
I'll move we approve the amendments.
Second. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Mendenhall. Moving on to item 9B, consideration of adopting the 2012 Bicycle Transportation Plan. Mr. Savay.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. Aside from providing a proactive approach to bicycle and pedestrian mobility in San Carlos, one of the other key reasons to develop a bike plan is because we need it to apply for and be competitive for grant funding. The plan before you is consistent with the Bicycle Transportation Act, which would allow us to go after that grant funding. San Carlos's first plan was developed by the BPAC, Bicycle Pedestrian Action Committee, back in 2003. That committee was joined with the Transportation and Circulation Commission back in 2007. So this plan was developed by the current Transportation and Circulation Commission and a subcommittee of the of commissioners on the Transportation and Circulation Commission. The plan goals address safe and convenient bikeways to workplaces and to shopping, schools, housing, and recreational areas in the city. The intent is to have a dynamic document that would be updated on a 2-year basis, and the plan contains recommendations for all bicyclists featuring a broad range of roadway improvements and accommodations. The plan sets up best practices for bicycle outreach, education, facilities design, maintenance, and enforcement of rules. In terms of the plan's content, it includes coverage of existing condition, a needs assessment, and opportunities analysis, as well as recommendations on bikeway network and new facilities. I thought I'd take a minute to clarify some of the most important bike travel improvements on our roadways and what they look like. The bike plan before you, you'll see in it that there's different types of bikeway improvements on the ground and for bikes, and these improvements are often referred to as Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3, and if you're not an avid bicyclist, it's best to show what these would look like. So this Class 1 bike path that you see here on the screen separates the bicyclist and the pedestrian from the vehicular roadway. And in a built-out city land like San Carlos, it's difficult to find the land to be able to do this kind of a bikeway. Class 2 bike lanes are popular with the biking community, and they help to safely guide bicyclists through the roadway network by clearly demarcating the bike route for everyone to see. As you can see, the green lanes there on the screen. We also have some bike lanes in San Carlos, Class 2. Class 3 bike routes are often marked with a bike route sign, and what we're seeing mostly today are the Sharrow markings that you see here on the slide in San Carlos, and they're often used in locations where the roadway is just too narrow to do the Class 2 bike lane. And one of the more recent improvements are the bike lanes in Sharrows on Alameda de las Pulgas, but you'll see these Sharrows all over San Carlos. What I'd like to do now is briefly cover some of the key bike plan recommendations. And one of the top east to west bike connections that are recommended is a bike and pedestrian path over US 101. The bike plan recommends the top tier bike connection improvements from the 2009 Holly Street Interchange Alternatives Analysis, which was previously approved by the City Council. This is Highway 101 here, and one option would be to have a separate bike path that would parallel the Holly Street overcrossing that would go over US 101, or the intent is to get people, another option would be to widen the overcrossing to accommodate riders and pedestrians on a widened portion of that interchange overcrossing. So those are some options that are being studied now. Another part of this idea is to move the ramp in the southbound direction to the east. And if that was done, then there'd be room here for another bikeway bike boulevard here that would connect to East San Carlos Avenue in the pink here, and then on to the rest of San Carlos Avenue, and a signalized intersection at Area F here. So that's some of the ideas that have been explored and some that are recommended here in this plan. This is the map outlining the key bikeway network recommendations in the plan, and some of the other key improvements would be bikeway improvements to Old County Road, and they're proposed as part of the East Side Connect project, and that would be here and here, and these are Class 2 and Class 3 bike lane improvements, and actually we do have some grant funding that will be mixed in with the East Side Connect project, and so we will see this constructed in 2013 as part of the East Side Connect project. East to west connections are also critical in getting people from downtown and into the work areas of our community on the east side, and also getting them back over from the east side to the housing areas. And most recently, the city of Redwood City received grant funding on a north to south bike network, which would complete Class 2 and Class 3 bike lanes on Shoreway Road up here and Skyway. So the city of San Carlos supported and helped participate in a grant application with the city of Redwood City, and that grant was obtained by Redwood City, and so this grant will pay for these improvements, Class 2 and Class 3 bike improvements here on these roads, and this will happen sooner. This will happen and be constructed in this year. The Transportation and Circulation Commission recommends that the City Council adopt the resolution supporting the 2012 Bicycle Transportation Plan. And I noted earlier that we have a couple of commissioners in the audience here tonight that are here to support the bike plan, and Commissioner Baumgarten was on the subcommittee that developed and made recommendations to the broader Transportation and Circulation Commission, and we have Commissioner Margaret Pye here as well. She's the vice chair of the TNC. And if I can't answer the question, I'll look to the commissioners to assist. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Svay. Okay, we're going to do council questions, then public comment, then council discussion. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Olmert?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Al, for a good presentation. I have to say that I very much like the plan. I mean, there are some details in it I'd love to talk to you about at some future date about how we might be able to actually make it a little better. But there was one element that I saw in the staff cover letter which actually concerned me, which I didn't find in the plan. I just want to make sure that it's not in the plan because the cover letter says it is. And the issue specifically was there's a phrase in here where it talks about the plan requires that any change, or the plan requires that any future changes to whatever street, Laurel Street, for example, not reduce its current value to bicyclists. And I mean, as a goal, I certainly don't have a problem with that. But as anything that's sort of an imperative or a binding constraint of some kind, that would cause me some concern. And not because I'm looking to do anything there, but just because it may unnecessarily constrain things that we might want to do in the future. So, but as I said, I couldn't actually find that language in the plan itself, even though the cover document says it was a change to incorporate that. So I'd like to know, first off, what the status was. If it's actually not in the plan, then my concern goes away.
Laurel Street is actually referred to in the plan in a couple of locations, but I think that that particular point perhaps is a little bit stronger in the staff report than it is in the policies of the plan itself.
Excuse me, Mr. Olbert, can you reference where you are?
It's on the second page under key elements of the
Mr.
plan.
Broca, it's the second page of the staff report, the first two bullet points, basically. Under the section, the major changes to the former plan are summarized as follows.
Thank you. I can follow.
Again, Laurel Street is mentioned a couple of times in the document. So in looking at the language in the document, it's actually perhaps less significant than it's stated in the staff report. For instance, if you look at page 17 in the bike plan, policy 12.15, it says Laurel Street there toward the top third of the page, and at the bottom it says, if the city makes any changes to Laurel Street, its value to bicyclists should be considered.
That I had seen, and that I'm okay with.
Yeah, and so that's what the plan says. So perhaps it was a little stronger wording in the staff report than it is in the actual document.
Okay. Let's see. I think the rest of these were implementation questions we can talk about later. Just take a quick look here. No, that was it. Thank you.
Mr. Grisilli?
No questions.
Mr. Collins?
Just a couple, Mr. Survey. Just curious, we have one Class 1 bike lane in town, right? That underpass that goes from Arroyo to Old County Road. Is there any ability or plans to create another Class 1 bike lane, such as, say, East San Carlos Avenue? Is that what you were talking about when you mentioned it?
Not to my knowledge, and again, as I noted earlier, the difficulty is really finding the land to do it. And many of our roadways are narrow, and there's private property next to the right of way. So a lot of times it's just very complex and challenging and expensive to buy the property and that kind of thing. So not to my knowledge. In the near future, we don't have any plans to create a Class 1 bikeway. We do have plans, as I noted, to do all the other classes, 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that, in fact, in my studies, and perhaps the other commissioners could chime in, but in my studies, sometimes bicyclists prefer a Class 2 or a Class 2 over a Class 1. Because you're sharing the roadway with pedestrians and skaters and people walking their dogs, and so it's actually more dangerous from a bicyclist perspective on Class 1 bikeways unless it's a dedicated bikeway. So they tend to like the Class 2 bikeways better.
Shows you how much I ride bikes. And the other question was, Belmont has a really nice new bike overpass over 101. How was that funded?
My understanding is that was mostly funded through grant funding, and
TA.
it was $10 to $11 million project. It was a very expensive project.
Thank you.
I can tell you about that.
Okay, Mr. Crocott.
The only question I have for staff is, because I didn't see a glossary of terms anywhere that goes along with the document, and maybe that would be a good idea to have, but there's this term on page 9 of the actual report, kind of close to the top. I think it's under 8.2.4, and it says there's no bike boulevard on an appropriate street between the north and south city borders. So I'm looking for a definition. I think I know what a bike boulevard is because I know Palo Alto has something they call a bike boulevard, but what is meant here?
A bike boulevard, to my knowledge, is something that is more for bicyclists than it is for vehicles or other modes of travel. So you'll see in other cities where they'll set up bollards or other restrictive measures in the roadway to prevent cars from going through. You may be able to get your car into your residence, but pass-through traffic is not allowed on a bikeway boulevard in most cases. So the intent is to make it a bike-centric roadway.
How would that, if that were to be taken up, how would that policy be established? I guess what I'm after, I'm a little concerned by it, you can tell perhaps, because it's mentioned in here, it's never been talked about up here, and I don't know that the Transportation Commission has ever sent to the council a question of whether or not we want to establish bike boulevards in San Carlos.
Mr. Survey, we have a bike boulevard discussion for Eastside Connect, correct?
Right. So So I guess there's different levels of bike boulevards, and perhaps I could refer to Margaret Pyer or Jack Baumgarten on this one, but there's different levels of bike boulevard, and I think you can establish it either as one that's more restricted with bollards and things like that, or just as a pass through an east to west or a north to south roadway with bike lane improvements on it, and call it a bike boulevard. We are calling East San Carlos a boulevard because it connects two parts of the city together, essentially, the east and the west sides, through the train station.
I'm going to mark that then as a question for discussion up here.
Okay.
I want to look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Surveyor. I have no questions. We're going to go to public comment. I only have one speaker slip, and that's from Suzanne Emerson. If anyone else would like to talk after Suzanne, please come up afterwards.
Good evening, Suzanne Emerson of San Carlos for San Carlos Green. We thank the Transportation and Circulation Commission for its hard work on developing this plan. We encourage the city to continue to study a bike boulevard concept so that perhaps one more north-south street on the west side would be specifically focused on being a bicycle-friendly street. And we encourage the city to consider different modes of modality in considering street and development design. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to council discussion. Mr. Grocott, you have something.
Okay. Well, I'll start my comments with the council that first, I guess I should say, I appreciate the work of the committee because I know they worked really hard on this. And I don't want to sound as though I'm being overly critical, but looking at it, my recommendation from what staff has given us is options. I would like to actually send this back to the committee to have a little more work done on it. I do like it, but there are some things I saw in it that I thought were could use some fleshing out, and I had some thoughts to that. So, do you want me to just run through those?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. The glasses back on. So I'm just sticking with the document itself. In the first section where it talks about goals of the plan, it does not mention that I can see anything about being a partner with our direct neighbors of Belmont and San Carlos, nor does it talk about the need to be integral, and this is somewhat related to the first comment, but to be integral to the county-wide bike routes, bicycle and pedestrian routes. And I think the document should acknowledge that, we're on the peninsula, we're working with other cities, and this is an issue that comes before the BPAC all the time when projects come to CCAG's BPAC. Does the project fit with the county-wide bicycle plan? And projects like that tend to get funded more readily, and so I think it's important to have that as a goal of the plan. Number two, there's a number of times in here where the plan talks about El Camino as though it's some kind of preferred north-south route in the city, and it's not on the countywide bicycle plan, I don't believe, as a north-south route. The north-south route in San Carlos actually is Old County Road, and of course we've done work on industrial to improve that and make it available, and then also on the Alameda we've made that available by doing bike lanes. But I don't see us doing anything on El Camino, and I think the committee should consider striking the language in the report that talks about El Camino. I am a cyclist, as most of you know. I avoid the El Camino like the plague because it's just very dangerous. There's too much congestion, too much traffic signals, and so forth. It's just not a good place for a bicycle to be. And I don't think, this is something I say all the time from BPAC, as chair of BPAC, there's no sense in putting in projects that are going to encourage bicyclists to go into an area that's dangerous, especially when we have alternatives where we can give them alternatives and encourage travel in places that are safe. I would like the report to somehow acknowledge the Bay Trail. This is another thing we talk about at BPAC, is that we have all these plans out there, and that the different cities have, and people, I think, don't know about some of the assets that are there, and certainly we tie into the Bay Area, to the Bay Trail, so our report should mention the Bay Trail as an asset that's in our community that we have access to encourage people to know about it and use it. Under item 5, about safe routes to school, while I appreciate the spirit of what's written there, I appreciate the spirit of it. I don't agree with it. We are grossly behind in doing anything about safe routes to school, and if we're going to soft pedal it, as is done in this report, it's not doing us any favors. I think we ought to admit that we're doing poorly. Part of the reason we're doing poorly is there's not enough grant funding for this kind of thing. There's not enough emphasis at the federal or state level that we can then bring down to the local level, and we're just in really bad shape here in San Carlos. We do Carless days where we expect kids to walk and ride their bikes to school, and the reason they don't do it the other days, I know. I try to take my son to Arundel just walking, and you nearly get killed going on San Carlos Avenue. So I think we ought to admit that weakness in this report and strike at it directly in this report. And by the way, in Section 8, where it talks about San Carlos Avenue specifically as a corridor, one of the things it does not mention is the eucalyptus trees. And I think it's high time that we address the eucalyptus trees, go ahead and mention them. They are a hazard, and they are an impediment to safe bicycle and pedestrian travel on San Carlos Avenue. And I would like to see that stated in the report. I know it's a political hot potato. I know the environmental, there's not all environmental people, but there are people who love trees, think those things are historic, and I know I'm going to hear from Cara Vonk tomorrow, but I would like to see something in this report about those trees. They're dangerous, and they are an impediment to safe bicycle and pedestrian travel. The issue, I'd like to hear some discussion from the council about a bike boulevard, because if what is meant in here is what they have in Palo Alto, I'm not sure San Carlos is ready for that, where we have bollards that on residential streets that mean if you live on that street, it's essentially a one-way street, because you can get in, the way they've done it in Palo Alto anyways, is it's you can get in and you can get out, but it's very restrictive on your travel in an automobile. A bicycle, it's great, because it's what it means is cars stop at all the intersections, and a bicycle can just go right straight through. So I'd like to hear some discussion, Mr. Mayor, on that particular item, and that's it.
Okay, Mr. Collins.
Well, let me first say I'm generally in support of the transportation plan, of the bike plan. I think it's generally well written, but I would agree with Councilman Grocott that the tree issue on San Carlos Avenue with respect to the eucalyptus really does need to be addressed. The only other comment I had was they mention on page 10 about the fact that Belmont maintains a barrier on Crestview which was designed to reduce automobile traffic but which was not designed to accommodate cyclists. I don't know if that's an issue or not. And I don't know how many people ride their bikes up in that area of town. But what I'd like to know is that being considered? Is it of a concern? Have we approached Belmont about possibly modifying that so that bicyclists could get through? I'm not clear why it was put in there.
I know why it was put in there.
Well, maybe you could help me out here.
The reason it was put in there is it was put in a little after I moved here in 1983. It's because they were planning on building all those condominiums up at the top of Crestview Drive, and Belmont did not want all that traffic cutting through on Hallmark to get to 280.
I understand why the barrier was
Okay,
put there. I'm just not clear why this section here about the barrier and the bicyclists is in here. There's
I'm
no
sorry.
remedy
I apologize.
proposed.
I thought you were asking about the
No.
barrier. I just woke up.
Right. No, it's
Sorry.
fine.
Actually,
That's all I had to say.
may I just,
Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
Silver? I suspect that part of what's happened, Ron, is what was put in there, there's a path that goes through the barrier. It's a walking path, and it's not surfaced. And I don't know if anybody deliberately designed it to not be surfaced so that one could not ride even a motorcycle through there. Okay, that's possibly the reason they did it, or it may have just been an oversight. I mean, certainly, that was one of the things that I mentioned that I was planning on talking to Al about offline, saying we ought to try and approach Belmont about it and see if there's something we can do.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Okay, Mr.
Thank you,
Priscilla.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, actually, I thought it was a very well-done report, but Mr. Savay, not discounting any of the comments that Mr. Grocott had, because he's certainly a lot closer to this than I think any of the council members. How does this work in a practical manner if we want to adopt some of the points that he brought up? Do we adopt them? Do we send it back? I mean, we could keep sending this back 6 ways to Sunday. Oh, wait, I forgot one. What is the process? What do you envision the process to be, should I say?
Well, one option is to make changes to the document. You've made some suggestions and recommendations, and often at the commission level or even the council level, we will incorporate changes into a document based on what you talk about, and you'll say, you could approve it with these changes.
Okay.
So that's an option. And so we would take notes on the areas that you want beefed up. We would take it back and make those changes.
But it doesn't have to go back to the commission again?
Not necessarily, unless that holds. But an option would be to either send it back to the commission, have them work on it, bring it back, we would tell you, or you could just say, we'll approve it with these changes, and staff will make those changes.
My point is, it doesn't have to go back. It's not a constant circle. It's back, it's here, it's back, it's here. Okay.
Right. Does not have to go back.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions, Mr. Grisilli?
No.
Mr. Olbert?
I just want to comment a little bit on some of the points that Matt raised. For what it's worth, Councilman Grocott raised. For what it's worth, I too was a little confused about the bicycle boulevard language, and there is some definitional information in the document about it, and I think you quite correctly gleaned what it would look like based on what you see in Palo Alto. But my sense from reading the plan was that that was talked about as something that could be done, not something that had to be done or that we were committing ourselves to do. Because my sense is that it would be, particularly in a community like San Carlos, but probably in any community, it'd be very difficult to retrofit something like that without having severe disruptions on the community. And I personally was comfortable with the notion, as long as the plan talked about it in terms of something that could be done. There's lots of things that can be done. That doesn't mean that we're going to do them. So I do think your point about also about the safe routes to school situation is well taken, and I was thinking that at the very least that section ought to be strengthened to talk about collaborations and with the school districts, both the high school district and the elementary school district. Whether we want to, in a planning document, basically talk about how poor the current situation is or not, I could go either way about that. I mostly like to try and build for the future and say, well, what do we want to do, rather than focus on necessarily where we are today. And then the other comment I'd make about some of the issues involving like the eucalyptus trees, I do agree with you that they can very definitely be a safety issue. I mean, that was a topic in a meeting, I think a couple of meetings ago here. But I'm not sure that necessarily, I'd probably be okay with that not being incorporated in the bicycle plan. Because to me, it's probably, not probably, it is a public health and safety issue. I think if I'm understanding your point correctly, that we're worried about trees dropping limbs on top of people or blowing over or falling down.
Excuse me.
Sure.
That's not the only concern. The concern is also that the trees lift the pavement that is there, number one. And number two, the trees, because of the way they are located, cause a circuitous route. In other words, it's just not a straight line. If you take the bike trail or the paved portion that's generally for walking, because what's going on there is there's a paved portion that supposedly, I guess, is for walking, and then in some cases there's a asphalt curb that marks the bike lane, so the bicyclist and the pedestrian are separated, but you get to areas where you have to go out almost into traffic or up against that curb if you're on a bicycle because of the trees. It's just, they are that's why I was very specific in my language. They are an impediment. And since that, let's see, that's Section 8, since San Carlos Avenue is mentioned specifically in the plan and lays out what some of the inadequacies are, like the crosswalk and so forth, I thought another detail that needs to be in there are the eucalyptus trees.
Fair enough. I appreciate the clarification.
Can I have a comment to that?
Let's let
All right,
Mr.
go
Olber
ahead.
finish.
Yeah, that's okay. The last point I was going to make is I'm not trying to read too much into what Councilman Grisilli was saying, but I suspect we could also be in a situation of tuning this forever. Personally, I would be willing to accept the plan as written with the proviso to staff that these issues that we've raised be brought back for discussion, because I presume plans can be amended. And rather than hold up the process of doing that, sort of put a marker in the ground and move forward. That's just my personal feeling.
Okay, Mr. Collins, you had something to add?
I don't want to beat the eucalyptus issue to death, but the other issue with the eucalyptus trees is that, aside from the safety issue, they constantly drop. Small limbs, leaves, those little seed pods, and all of those things. And I took that path numerous times as a child and rode my bike on it as a child, and I'm sure it's not any different now. In fact, it may even be more dangerous now with the way the bikes are designed. But it's just the constant debris that I think is more than a safety issue. Long term, in terms of long term planning with this transportation plan. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Okay, the only comments I really have to make essentially is I agree with Mr. Olbert. I think we should approve this plan and then bring back some of the items that we discussed to amend the plan and continue to move forward instead of sending it back. I also feel that the eucalyptus tree should be left out of this because I think it's a larger issue than just a bike issue, and I'm sure in about a month we're all going to hear about how big of an issue it is since 3 of us voted to take down the eucalyptus trees in Burton Park. I'm really would be hesitant to put it in a plan like this. I think it requires a broader discussion. I'm sure the public outcry that's going to happen in about a month is going to be loud enough for us to realize that that needs to be a separate issue to begin with. So I would like to entertain a motion to accept the plan as is with the direction for staff to bring back some of the items Mr. Grocott, Mr. Olbert, and Mr. Collins brought up.
I have a question. When would those be coming
Where
back?
would that be?
Well, I'm sure they're going to take some time to go over some of these issues. It's not an overnight process.
Yeah, I think my suggestion would be that your comments and direction be referred back to the Traffic and Circulation Commission for amendment to the plan. I think some of the items that you started out talking about, Vice Mayor Grocott, about the regionalization of the plan and some of the connections to our neighboring agencies are larger issues that I think the commission would want to discuss and weigh in and do some research and investigation on before they could make these amendments and bring it back. So my guess is if you could give them 6 months to work on amending it, that would probably be a reasonable time frame to start with to get an amendment back to you. And in the meantime, we'll have an approved plan in place to help with any potential grant opportunities that come up in the meantime.
What about the language regarding safe routes to school?
I think that would probably be a discussion that we want to bring back. I mean, we could tweak it right now, but we could bring it back for a full discussion. I mean, I understand you want to point out they're failing, and then Mr. Olbert brings up a good point where pointing out the failures isn't always the best way to move forward. So, I mean...
Can we, I don't mean to be contrarian here, but I would be interested to know, this is the first time this plan, as so far as I know, has come to the council from these guys. They've done a lot of hard work on it. Obviously, I disagree with Mr. Grisilli to this point. It's a little bit like our attorney was telling us earlier in the evening that you have a chance at something, and if you don't do it, then you've lost your chance. We just had a chance to make some comments. This is the first time this document has come to the council. This committee's worked very hard. I'm sure they were very curious. What's the response of the council going to be? Well, we've given some response. My take on it would be, similar to the way I do business. I meet with a client, we go over some plans, they send me back to tweak those a little bit. You don't hit a home run on the first time. So, we're we're the arbiters of this as the council. We create this commission to give us, things like this. I don't see any harm in maybe dividing up some of this. The bigger issues, like the regional issue, give them some time to talk about. There was something else that was, maybe give them 6 months to come back to us. But some of these things are, I think we give them an opportunity to, a month or two. I don't think there's any huge rush on this document. Give it back to them. See what they come up with. See what they think. I'm not saying this stuff has to be in here, but I felt pretty strongly about some of these items. I would like to know how they feel about it, and give them the opportunity to either change their document or not change their document. And if they don't change the document, just come to the council and explain why. I think that's a pretty small
Chair, perhaps you misunderstood what I was trying to say.
I may have.
I was sort of supporting, we're going to make some changes, let's make some changes.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it goes back, and they say, they say, we don't agree with that. Here it comes. Now we get to talk about it again.
Yeah.
Isn't that great? I mean, to me, that's just repeating the story. Want to make some changes? Let's make them. That's me. I'm ready to go right now on every one of your items. Go up or down right now. And we'll do it, and the report will be done. I can't understand why we're doing this. Just send it back, and they may have a completely different outlook on this. And because they wrote it, so they didn't have that item. Maybe we just gave them a brain idea or something, but it just seems like it's going to be repetitive, and we're going to have the same discussion in 6 months if it doesn't come back the way you want it. And I don't say you, but the way all of us want it. So I'm sort of going, hey, let's go down your line, up or down, we're good. It's finished.
Well, through the chair.
That's all I'm looking at. You misunderstood me about what I was trying to do.
And through the chair, this is something that comes up on occasion with our commissions, because they do this kind of work, and there's sometimes commissioners that take offense when council in a very strong fashion changes a document that they've worked so hard on. I remember when Mr. Klein was chair of the general plan, and the document came to us on the council, and what kind of changes will the council make? They didn't sit in on the discussions and all the deliberations, and yet they just so easily made this or that change. And that's why, respectively, with all due respect to the commission, they've heard the council's comments, albeit most of them from this guy. I'm not saying do those things necessarily. I'm saying those are my concerns. Go noodle on them. If you bring it back and you decide we don't want the eucalyptus trees in the report, okay, fine. I get it. I'm okay with that. But
you're not going to bring it up again?
No.
Okay.
I've had my say.
Fine.
I've had my say.
Then I'll be happy to send it back. But,
okay.
But you know what my point is?
Yes,
see my point?
I understand. Yeah, I don't want to go back.
You shouldn't have a right to say it. Don't get me wrong.
No.
But if we're going to go through this again, we say, well, I still disagree, and I think, then we're just going to go round and round. That's the way I look at it. So whatever the council wants to do.
Mr. Olbert.
Just a quick question, perhaps to staff. I can understand a couple of the issues maybe taking 6 months to resolve, particularly the ones that require interfacing with other organizations. But my sense was that most of the other comments that were being teed up here, even if they were to be incorporated, I have a hard time visualizing it would take that long.
Well, Mr. Olbert, I think a lot of it comes down to an agenda issue. I'm not going to let you guys bring the bike plan back in 2 different bites. If we're going to bring it back, we bring it back all as one, and then we move forward. It's dividing this up into multiple nights, just like Mr. Grisilli says, just gets ridiculous.
Yeah, I believe they only meet, do they meet every month now?
They meet quarterly, right?
Or is it once a month?
Yeah.
So that's only 6 meetings for them to take a look, and if they need to coordinate with another agency or bring in outside experts, that may be erring on the side of caution to bring it back. Obviously, if it was done sooner, we'd bring it back sooner than that, and we could certainly try to push it. But I was also sort of echoing what the vice mayor said. I don't think there's a real a dire need to approve this plan. I think it would be nice to have it on the books now because things can come up, and we've been without a plan now for a while. I do like Councilmember Olbert's idea of approving the plan as is or with some minor changes tonight, and then asking the commission to take it up again immediately and begin to work on some of these larger issues. It's sort of, you've kind of talked about 3 different approaches on moving this forward, and that one seems to be kind of the middle of the road approach.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to sort of follow up on what the city manager just said. Make a motion to adopt the plan that we have presented to us and the hard work that was done on it by the Traffic and Circulation Commission and by staff, and then to send back some of the questions and comments made by the council members back to them to come back to us literally within 6 months so we can tweak it. That's my motion.
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes.
And I'd like to give credit to the chair. Mr. Olbert's idea, I didn't mean to steal your thunder and make the motion. So,
If it goes bad, it's your idea.
Okay, thank you to our Traffic and Circulation Commissioners who are here. It's a wonderful report, and we look forward to your future recommendations. Moving on to item 9C, consideration of polystyrene food container ordinance for restaurants in San Carlos. Report on outreach process and direction to staff. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Let me end this show, and we'll go to the next one. Okay, for three of you, this may be a bit of a review, but for the two new council members, perhaps a new adventure. Some history. A year ago, roughly, the City Council put this item on the strategic plan objective and asked the staff to come back during that first 6-month segment and present the pros and cons of a potential styrofoam ban to the City Council. We did that on July 11th, and the Council approved staff doing some further work on this and also doing an outreach process with the restaurants in the community. On August, in your next strategic plan on August 29th, the council asked staff to continue to work on this item and to present for action either a voluntary or mandatory ban during the next 6-month segment, which ends at the end of this month. We had originally agended this item on January 23rd, your last meeting, but due to the press of some other items, was continued to tonight. So tonight we're asking you to hear the report and give staff direction after you get a report on the outreach effort. Just a quick overview of the polystyrene food container ban. The issues that brought this before us. Polystyrene is essentially a lightweight material that can be formed into a number of items, many of which are food containers used in restaurants. Some of the concerns about this material is that once polystyrene is soiled, primarily with food, it's no longer reusable or recyclable. When polystyrene is recycled, usually the recycling plants want it clean, and obviously, almost by definition, when it's soiled, it can't be cleaned. It's a significant source of litter and marine pollution, and there's a number of other issues. Some of the comments opposing regulation from the polystyrene industry are primarily as it relates to replacements from paper and recyclables. They feel that unless the replacements are properly recycled, that there's not necessarily significant difference. In terms of local ordinances, these started to occur several years ago after the state legislature repeatedly was unable to develop a statewide ban. In 2008 and again in 2010, 4 cities in the North County portion of San Mateo County decided to develop their own one-off city-specific ordinances. This included Millbrae, South San Francisco, Pacifica, and San Bruno. Last year, the county developed a model ordinance that initially covered unincorporated areas with the exception of SFO, and the reason for that is SFO is covered by the City and County of San Francisco's ordinance. Since that time, 3 cities in the county have now adopted the county model ordinance: Half Moon Bay, Burlingame, and Foster City, and those ordinances are now up and running. We also know that in the next month or two, both Belmont and Redwood City on either side of us are nearing action on a ban of this type as well. And as I note, if Belmont, Redwood City, and San Carlos were to join the other 6 agencies, what we will have is roughly half the county covered by one of these bans, either the model or by their own. One of the interesting things, by the way, about the county's model ordinance on polystyrene, and again, you'll hear this on the other ordinance related to plastic bags, is the county is offering to cities that if cities adopt the model ordinance, the county will do all outreach, education, and enforcement at no cost to the city. It's kind of a unique offer, and it's one of the reasons I think that we're seeing more cities look at the model ordinance. The county notes that to date, even though other cities have delegated enforcement and fines to them, that there have been no enforcement actions or fines in the 3 cities that have adopted the model ordinance. And I should mention before forgetting that Dean Peterson, the County Environmental Health Director, whose department is responsible for enforcing the model ordinance, is here tonight to answer questions. Now I want to talk a little bit about our stakeholder outreach meeting. As the council knows, the practice that we followed throughout all of our green programs, whether it's building codes or whether it's this program or many others, the Climate Action Plan, et cetera, is we always do outreach with the stakeholders. In this case, we contacted all of the restaurants in San Carlos. We learned there's over 110 of them, quite a few. Most of them are located in the downtown, primarily on Laurel Street. The outreach, as the staff report indicates, included one-on-one meetings, phone calls, emails. We sent a mailing to every single restaurant in town. We also had an online survey. We had an outreach meeting in December with a group of the restaurants. That was very helpful as well. We had roughly a 23% response rate. We actually had a couple additional responses between your last meeting and this meeting, and that's why the numbers are a little higher tonight. What we learned is that of the 25 restaurants we heard from, 20 of them are in favor of the council adopting a ban. Perhaps more interestingly, or maybe even surprisingly, of the 10 restaurants that currently use polystyrene, 70% of those restaurants also thinks the council should adopt a ban. In terms of the question of those restaurants who currently have polystyrene, how long would it take them to switch? We kind of were split 50-50. Half of them thought they could do it in 30 to 60 days. The other half thought they could do it in 90 days or more. So essentially, the staff conclusions are, and what we found is, number one, that many of our restaurants no longer use polystyrene. Not only have some of them stopped months ago, in some cases they stopped years ago. Some of our newer restaurants have never used polystyrene. They've used compostables from day one. The restaurants who've made the switch will tell you that perhaps earlier in their use of polystyrene, in the early days, some of them call it, there was a significant cost differential, but today, as more and more restaurants use compostables, the difference, in their opinion, is relatively minor. And they see a benefit from, as more restaurants come on, that difference, in their opinion, will shrink further. Another interesting thing that we heard from the restaurants who have made the change, and also from those who are in favor of the ban, even when they're using it, is they feel it's important for the city and for the restaurant community in San Carlos to make what they call a statement. They think it's very important to be able to say that no matter where you go to eat at a restaurant in San Carlos, that they're all green and they all use compostables. And I've heard that several times now, that the restaurant community thinks that's a very powerful statement. And that was also an interesting finding from our outreach. Another thing that we heard pretty consistently was on the question of, did the restaurants want the city of San Carlos to have its own unique city-specific ban versus using the county ordinance? Everyone wanted us to use the model ordinance. I could not find one restaurant who was interested in a specifically San Carlos tweaked ordinance. As I noted before, under the county's model ordinance to date, they have had no requests for extensions on the transition. They've had no requests for exceptions. They've issued no warnings, and they've levied no fines. So the staff recommendation to you tonight is to direct staff to prepare the county model ordinance for adoption by the council. We believe that this could be done in an upcoming meeting, the next 1 to 3 meetings. And also, to be very generous with the transition, the staff believes that if we allow a 6-month transition period, which admittedly is longer than some of the other cities, in Millbrae, for example, the transition period was only 90 days. But we think if we offer a very liberal transition period, particularly to address the restaurants who felt they would need more than 3 months, we feel that that would help ease the transition to such an ordinance. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments that you may have before you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. We're going to do questions. Mr. Olbert, do you have any?
Yes, I just have one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Moore, as I understand it, part of the way utilizing the county ordinance works is we get to rely on their CEQA declaration. Is that correct?
Actually, and I'll also defer to Mr. Rubens, it's our understanding that for this particular type of ban, that this is categorically exempt from CEQA, so we would probably do what's called a categorical exemption. Is that?
We do that, and sometimes you can refer to other environmental documents as the basis for your determination if it doesn't qualify for the exemption. But I think that's the case here.
Okay. I think you probably anticipated my next question, because what I was going to ask is something stemming from the bag ban that Manhattan Beach did, the case that went to the Supreme Court. I was just curious about whether or not, if you referred to another agency's CEQA declaration, if you were, and if they got sued, would we potentially have liability? And I think what you're saying is that we'd be making, it sounds like we'd be making our own independent.
Yeah, since it would be an ordinance that we would be enacting our project, if you will, we would be doing our own independent environmental analysis, but the data and information that came from the other environmental report can be used by us. If there's something that's unique to San Carlos, we would probably need to address that in our own environmental document.
And just to clarify, because I'm a little new to this, what I also heard the two of you say just now is that you believe it would be a categorical exemption anyway.
For the polystyrene
For the
food container.
Right. And I guess to add to the city attorney's comments, you'll see when we get to the other report, our recommendation is different on that one. We're not recommending a categorical exemption on the plastic bags, for the reason that there has been significant litigation on that ban. I think what's happened, by the way, on polystyrene, you now have over 10% of every city in California who has such a ban, and the rate is increasing. So there isn't litigation, there isn't industry opposition, and we think that the risk of litigation on this one is relatively low.
Thank you.
Mr. Grisilli?
I have no questions on this one.
Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple. I noticed that there's a list of 73 companies that make compostable food service containers, I guess, and food service products. Any idea of how many of those are located in California?
I did a quick scan based on the area codes, and it looked like over half of them were in California. And I should also mention that in our discussions with the restaurants, one of the questions I had for them is whether there would be any interest in perhaps the restaurants getting together or working with the city on some sort of buying cooperative or something to bring the price down. And the response I got, particularly from the restaurants that already were using compostables, is they didn't see the need. They felt there were so many suppliers and the cost was dropping so quickly that they said thank you, but what's the point?
Okay. And I noticed that there was a couple of letters, one from it was a combined letter supported by the Chamber of Commerce and the Restaurant Association and all that, and they mentioned that after the San Francisco ban went into effect, the litter actually increased, but then there's another letter that says that it went down by 36%, and I was a little confused about that. Do you have any thoughts on that? It just seemed that we had two different impressions of what happened.
Right, yeah, and I think again, depending on whether you're talking to supporters or opponents, there's different opinions both on this ban and also the other one in terms of the question of when you substitute paper materials for the styrofoam about that. The one thing that is significant, though, as it relates to San Carlos and SBWMA, as we talked about earlier, is we do have the ability to recycle paper compostables in our new system as of, the first of last year. So that's also significant both for the restaurants and for residential folks as well. Soiled paper is very recyclable in our system, whereas soiled styrofoam is not.
Thank you.
And Mr. Wilcott?
Excuse me. I was just trying to get a hold of the statistics here that are on page 3, and I took note that they changed a little bit on your overheads, but like on bullet point number 2, it says you had changed it. 7 of the 10 restaurants now using polystyrene are in favor of the city ban. So, I was comparing that to the results of the outreach process. We heard from 25 restaurants, which represents originally you said 23 restaurants, represents 20% response rate, so I was trying to do the math on that, so I guess we've got about 115 restaurants in San Carlos?
Correct.
Okay, so of the 115, 10 use polystyrene.
That's correct.
So did staff do any kind of survey or looking around at how much of a problem this really is? I mean, do we have styrofoam containers that are ending up in the wrong place or whatever?
We've had comments over the years from members of the public complaining about polystyrene litter around town and why the city hasn't moved to ban it, yes. I wouldn't say it's a big-time complaint, relatively speaking, but we do hear about it from time to time.
But we don't really have any statistics on, like, you know, when the Lions go out and clean up Holly 101 and what they pick up. Is there any kind of survey of the trash that's picked up and what's or Laurel Street or
Mr.
whatever?
Rocott, to interrupt, the one time we do hear the major complaints is for the creek cleanups, and that's where they find the majority of it is in the creeks, but there's no actual data of, like, poundage.
What's that word again?
Anecdotal.
Anecdotal.
Word of the night.
That's a good word. I'm going to have to keep hold of that one. Okay. All right. And then I think Mr. Collins asked this question, but I'm not sure if that's what he asked or not. You were asking about container companies that make these containers. Were you asking the ones that make the, you know, the alternative containers, or the companies that actually make the polystyrene containers?
No, my impression of these 73 companies are these are companies that make compostable food service containers.
That's right.
Do we know
as opposed to styrofoam.
And do we know anything about the companies that make styrofoam containers being located in California?
We know that there are some, but I don't know that we've heard from any or we have any statistics about them per se, no.
Okay. All right.
Okay. I have no questions, Mr. Morris, so we're going to go to public comment. First we have Pat Potter, followed by Suzanne Emerson.
Potter, San Carlos Green. We are here to support the ban on polystyrene, and we would like to encourage you to make it come into effect in 3 months instead of 6. Thanks.
Good evening, Suzanne Emerson of San Carlos for San Carlos Green. Echoing what Pat just said, we like the idea of the ban, and anecdotally, when I've done stream cleanups here in San Carlos, a lot of what we find are plastic bags, polystyrene containers, and then drink cups, especially the lids, the plastic lids on the drink cups. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, we will start council discussion. Does anyone want to jump in? Mr. Collins.
Well, I'll just, one short comment that I thought about. I really don't have anything else to add. I'm generally in favor of this. It just seems to me that the evolution of food containers is making styrofoam obsolete, and it's been a long time in coming. This may be in effect like banning the buggy whip. So that's all.
Okay. Mr. Grocott?
Well, I'm really bothered by our approach because when I read that we're going to have an ordinance banning something, that's troublesome to me. Banning anything, because I always appreciate more the carrot approach than the stick approach, and to me this is the stick approach. And adding to it, I think, as Mr. Collins stated, I was sitting here thinking how, you know, there's thousands of laws that are on the books that were written to address, you know, some problem at some certain time in history, and the problem goes away because the technology changes, but the law still sits there on the books. And to me, it's silly. I haven't been to a restaurant in some time, I would say, you know, anecdotally, a couple of years, where you know, I'm thinking of the Chinese takeout, or when we go to Patio Filipino up in Millbrae. the restaurants I've been to in San Carlos, anytime you get anything take home, it's not in styrofoam. It's always in some kind of pressed kind of cardboard or something else. So I think we're a day late and $1 short on this. I think the other cities and municipalities, I guess, have done the heavy lifting, but why do we need to do any lifting at all on this? And the second part, in terms of approach, that I don't agree with it on this is drives to my question to Mr. Mora about surveying the trash. Now, it's fine to say, I would agree with you, those lids are terrible. They're all over the place. But I really think we should take instead of taking what I'm going to, no disrespect to anybody, but what I see as being sort of a knee-jerk response to what everyone around us is doing. Everyone around us is doing this, and the county's got a model program, so let's latch our, caboose or whatever onto that train and ride it. I disagree with that because I take the trash problem seriously. I've said that before. Like, you go out to Holly 101, and it's, unless the Lions have been out there for a weekend, it's terrible a lot of times. You walk down Laurel Street, and we've got so many restaurants, or mostly delis, and I don't want to pick on anybody, but coffee shops, that you go in to get a cup of coffee, they give you, there's no choice. All you get is a paper cup, and that ends up in our trash. And on a weekend, especially popular weekends in the summer, it means our trash cans are overflowing, and it ends up out on the street and in the curbs and who knows where else. So when I look at San Carlos specifically, I don't see this as a problem. We got 10 restaurants that use this stuff, and would probably, if we encouraged them and said, hey, we got a green program, we'll give you a decal, you can put it on your window, and you can be a San Carlos green restaurant because you use, cardboard takeout. There's a good carrot approach, right? So you do that, but then you really look at what your trash is in the street and design a program specifically for San Carlos to clean up this city. We've been talking about how to clean up Laurel Street, for instance, for 5 years, and I haven't seen anything come out of this council or out of our staff to address that problem. We still have it. And this is not addressing the problem. Neither is the next item. So that's where I stand on it.
Thank you, Mr. Grocott. Mr. Olbert or Mr. Grisilli?
I'm actually fine with supporting this. I see sufficient evidence of its utility, or what I think would be its utility around town. But I do have one question. May I ask a follow-up question of staff?
Absolutely.
And that is something that was triggered by what Vice Mayor Grocott said. It is actually striking when you lay this item and the next item against each other. The approaches are a little bit different because the bag ban, the single-use bag ban, does have the component of charging people for paper bags.
Correct.
So why was that kind of approach deemed not useful in this situation? Do we have any insight into that?
I haven't, I hear what you're saying, Councilmember Olbert. I don't believe I've seen a styrofoam ban with a charge, but maybe I'll ask Mr. Peterson, since he's here. He's probably done more homework on this than I have, if he's familiar with such an ordinance.
Good evening, Council. Dean Peterson, your Director of Environmental Health. That's a good question. It really kind of started, the charge on the bags, which we'll talk about in the next item, is more about ensuring that it's a level playing field for the type of bag. This does not preclude restaurants on the polystyrene from charging if it is an additional cost. And also the reason on the single-use bag ban, the charge is not only to help the stores recoup the cost, but also to encourage customers from bringing in their own bag. And that's difficult to do if you're going to be taking away at a restaurant.
And the analogy would be we'd be looking for some mechanism to encourage people to bring their own containers to restaurants when they pick up their takeout food.
Which, as the environmental health director, we really wouldn't like to see that happen. So, yeah, it's a balancing act. Yeah,
I get it. Thank you.
Mr. Grisilli?
So I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, well, I only have a handful of comments. First off, I'll vote for the motion if it has the 6 months. I prefer to see a lesser time because I think even the restaurant said that 90 days was like the outer limit that they would actually need. So if we could do 3 months, that would be better. And just to bring up a couple things that were brought up by Mr. Grocott, we've been doing the carrot approach for a while now. Correct, Mr. Morrow? We've been doing our green program for over 5 years at this point, correct?
That's correct.
These restaurants have been doing this, and so at some point you do have to bring the stick out to get rid of the last ones who have not come over. So we have been doing the carrot for a very long time. If you want to get some actual statistical data, I invite you to come to the street cleanups, which you actually pushed for at our strategic plan retreat, yet I'm the only council member who's gone to the Laurel Street cleanups. Feel free to come and see all the trash that's out there, and a lot of it is styrofoam and other things. So, I think we've done our job as a city, and it comes to a point where that last 10% you're just not going to get unless you ban it. And I think that's why this is coming forward. So I will entertain a motion, but I would ask maybe we could try for an earlier completion date as opposed to 6 months.
Can I ask a
sure, Mr.
question? I'd like to get staff's impression, since you're the ones who did all of the outreach. There is the exception language in there. Is there a way for the exception language to apply? Let's say we did accelerate the phase-in. Can somebody ask for an exception for an extra 3 months?
I'm going to ask Dean to answer that since he's the keeper of the exceptions.
The keeper of the exceptions. Is that on your business card?
It's on my resume.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question was that if we were to think about having a faster phase-in, say 3 months rather than the 6 months that's in the staff recommendation, would a business operation that felt they could not make the transition in 3 months but could do it in 6 months, could they ask for an extension?
Absolutely, and we would probably do it a lot more informally in that as my staff is going out there, we would work with them to get them through the product. What we don't want is we don't want a restaurant that has the material in the back of their store to throw that away. You might as well use it up, and so we would work with them and identify how we can get them to comply.
And just a quick follow-up, I presume that would be part of or could be part of your outreach educational program is to make sure that vendors knew that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, one more comment, too, on this through the chair to Councilmember Olbert's point. I think one of the interesting things I heard and found in talking to the restaurants that had made the transition is they did make the comment to me repeatedly that the transition happened a lot faster than they thought it would, that they thought it would take a lot longer. And we had a couple restaurants in particular that actually argued for even a 30-day transition. Their point was that in their experience, most restaurants don't keep more than a month of these kind of containers on hand. So I think since Mr. Peterson's showing some flexibility, certainly staff would be okay with the shorter timeline. We were just trying to honor the results of the survey.
Well, Mr. Mayor, let's try teeing something up. I'll move that we accept staff's recommendation with the modification that we use a 3-month phase-in period as opposed to 6 months.
Is there a second? Second. Madam Clerk? Oh, Mr. Grocott?
Yeah, just before we vote, I would like to ask the city attorney something, because there were articles in the paper about this issue before it came to us tonight, and it was very strongly stated by the mayor that he thought this was a no-brainer and we should go ahead and ban these things. Now, this isn't a public hearing, but can you tell us how that sets with voting on an issue when having already stated their position publicly before our meeting?
Well, the first item is just was looking at the actual agenda, and because this is consideration of bringing an ordinance forward, I think that the real decision is going to be made at a future meeting when the ordinance comes forward. There'll be an opportunity for the public to comment. It'll be a notice public hearing, et cetera. I suppose the issue you're talking about is has someone prejudged it, but I think in the context of this, that this is just direction to bring an ordinance forward, I think that the real decisions being made later, I think that's just opinion. But the real issue is going to be when the actual ordinance comes before you, and the public has an opportunity to comment on that ordinance. And there's always an opportunity to change one's mind at that time if the public comes out or if different facts are brought to bear.
So this is an introduction of an ordinance?
No, it's direction.
This is just direction to bring an ordinance back.
Direction of staff, right?
Yeah, all right.
Okay, so Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 10A. New business, consideration of banning single-use carry-out shopping bags at retail establishments in San Carlos. Update, reaffirm previous council direction, support studying county model ordinance, and authorize outreach program. Mr. Mora.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. And as I alluded to earlier, this one is similar yet different. As you will probably note from the language, similar timeline here. This was also first brought to staff through the council strategic plan on February 18th. The direction here was a little different from council. The council approved further analysis by staff, but they also wanted to strongly encourage staff to, quote, explore opportunities to work with the county and other cities on a potential ban. This was at your July 11th meeting last year. On August 29th, this was returned to the strategic plan, again similar to the last item, present to the council for action a voluntary or mandatory ban, and that's what we're here tonight to talk about, the status of that particular work. Arguments for a ban, similar to the other item, plastic shopping bags are heavily used and often found discarded in garbage and landfills. The folks opposed to the use of these bags will tell you that there's almost 400 of these bags per second used in the state that are not recycled. There's concerns about litter, impact on marine life, and also they interfere with recycling center equipment. And if you've been to the Shoreway tour, or if you haven't, when you go there, you'll see that that's one of the features. And so the advocates of these bans will tell you that they would encourage folks to use reusable shopping bags. Some of the comments we hear from the industry are that they believe that the death of sea creatures is caused more by nets than plastic bags. They don't believe that the amount in landfills is significant compared to other materials in landfills. And they also have some arguments about why one would not want to use a paper bag either. I think what's most interesting is their very last point, saying that they don't believe that these bans are effective unless you charge for the use of paper bags, which of course is in fact a feature of the ordinances we're talking about. In California, this is a newer movement or area than the styrofoam, unlike the other ban area where 10% of all cities were already doing it. Here we have a smaller number, 14 cities and 5 counties. Again, these are higher numbers than you saw last year when we had this last report for you. Just within the last couple of weeks, the city of Millbrae has now adopted the first plastic bag ban in the county. And because the county model ordinance is not yet complete, they've done a city-specific ordinance, just as they did in styrofoam. The city of South San Francisco has had a voluntary ban in the last year, and they feel it's now appropriate to move towards a mandatory ban, very consistent with some comments you heard earlier from the mayor. The city of Daly City is also, quote-unquote, studying options, and staff believes that South City and Daly City are likely to be the second and third cities that have their own ordinance, although they obviously have the option of working on the model ordinance. In November, staff began or continued to our work and talked with the county staff and tried to move the model county ordinance along. Around that same time, the council also received a letter from Supervisor Carol Groom asking for interest of cities who wanted to participate in a plastic bag ban. At that time, there were only 5 of the 18 cities in the county that have retailers that were interested. But along the way, things changed. In January, we had a meeting of the cities that were interested, and between November and January, the number of cities that were interested went from 5 to 14. Staff believes in part that's due to the recent NPDES stormwater requirements that were at one of your earlier meetings, where cities get points or credits for both polystyrene bans and plastic bag bans. And indeed, we understand that in particular the city of Redwood City's interest in a plastic bag ban is specifically for that purpose. And since that meeting, which was only a couple weeks ago, today all 18 cities with retailers are interested in either their own ban or the county's model ordinance, which suggests that once this gets rolling, we will in fact have, in effect, countywide coverage of such a ban. Environmental review, which Councilmember Olbert brought up earlier. And as I hinted, we're going to have a somewhat different discussion here. The plastic bag industry has been much more aggressive in opposing these bans than has the styrofoam industry. They feel that any city or county that implements a ban is engaged in what's called a project under CEQA, and that's magic language here in terms of suggesting that some form of CEQA review is going to be needed. The county is proposing to do a countywide environmental impact report that would cover the county unincorporated areas and all 18 cities. They are also proposing to do this EIR review at their cost, so it would be no cost to the city. Those of you who were on council last year will recall that one of the concerns that several cities had was the cost of such a report, and there was even talk at one point about either having a multi-city EIR or working through CCAG and doing it there. So the county's offer kind of takes that issue off the table in terms of cost. There have been past industry lawsuits. Locally, one of the more notable ones was in Palo Alto, where they limited the scope of the plastic bag ban to grocery stores only. Although what's interesting is since that time, the grocery industry is now much in favor of having bans that cover all retailers so that they don't want to be picked upon or discriminated against, I guess one could say. The Manhattan Beach case that we talked about in the staff report was a key consideration last summer for not moving ahead, not only in San Carlos, but in many of the cities around the county and the state. Since our report to you in the summer, that case has been settled. The city won the lawsuit, and basically the lawsuit said that in the case of that particular city, that a so-called initial study and negative environmental declaration was sufficient environmental review to move ahead. Another key item I wanted to highlight for you, and it's in the staff report, is to talk a little bit about the City of San Jose's ordinance. It took effect on January 1st of this year. It's the largest plastic bag ban in the nation. It is, interestingly, because it covers all retailers, as I alluded to earlier, it is supported by both the grocery stores and the retail industry, and also by the green groups. And it is rapidly becoming the model for other bag ordinances in California. Some of the key provisions is that it focuses on what are called single-use carry-on plastic bags. These are the handled bags that are used at checkout as opposed to other types of plastic bags. It talks about allowing paper bags if they have 40% or more of post-consumable recycled content. They use a system where in the initial phases of the ordinance, paper bags are charged at 10 cents a bag for the reasons that you heard earlier from Mr. Peterson, and they increased that to 25 cents a bag on January 1 of 2014, 2 years into the ordinance. Retailers are required to keep a record of the bags sold. The paper bag industry is working with San Jose on putting barcodes on the bag, so it's easy for the retailers to track that simply by scanning the bag along with the other items purchased at the store. The ordinance allows protective plastic or paper bags for things such as food, medicine, etc., and it exempts food stamp purchasers until January 1 of 2014. When you look at the Model County Ordinance, which is just now in draft, you'll see that it largely tracks the San Jose Ordinance. Again, it covers all retailers. Exemptions include restaurants, primarily because they are recently subject to the polystyrene ban, and the thought was not to pile on, as it were. It also exempts pharmacies in terms of medicine. However, drugstores are covered if they're issuing single-use retail handled bags. And it also exempts 501c3 nonprofits. And as we indicated earlier, like the Styrofoam model ordinance, all of the outreach enforcement costs are handled by the county. As I noted earlier, the environmental review, right now the status of that, as you saw in your staff report, is the county has an RFP out for consultants to handle the EIR preparation. And as I noted earlier, this is a document that could be used by the county and all the cities. The timeline that is attached to your staff report and is shown suggests that looking at the work the county still needs to do in the EIR and finishing out the draft model document, that in theory they could have action on such a document by October or November, and cities can continue utilizing their model ban language towards the end of this year. Outreach. As you saw with the work we did with the Styrofoam ban, staff is proposing a very similar process here, although a bit larger. Obviously, we have more retailers than we do restaurants, so staff believes it's going to take a little longer than it took us on restaurants. Also, I'm proposing that we invite the public in on this discussion because it will have a significant impact on them as well, potentially. And so we would have one and perhaps two meetings with the community as well during this process. And we would ask questions very similar to what we did on polystyrene. You know, are they interested in the city using the model ordinance? Are they interested in the city-specific ordinance? Are there features that they'd like to have on ours? Timing on transitions, things of that sort. And again, a very similar process in terms of stakeholder meetings, online surveys, mail-outs, et cetera, is to hear issues, concerns, and thoughts. And I'm also thinking of using a similar process as before where we work with the Chamber of Commerce, and they've also indicated that they are already willing to work with staff. And we've also had some interest, once again, from the youth development staff, from Mike Becker, and we anticipate that YC may also be interested this time. So the recommendations on this item, again, this is at a much earlier stage than the item you just heard. At this point, we recommend continuing to work with the county and with the other agencies. We recommend that along the way we do an outreach effort once the model ordinance draft becomes a little bit more firmed up with both retailers and residents. And again, that would explore both using the model and a city-specific ordinance. And as I note in the alternative, the council could theoretically pursue a city-specific ordinance. We've had some discussions with community development and the city attorney. There might be ways to shave a little time off here and there. We could be slightly earlier, although because we already have some cities who have been at this longer than we have, we're clearly not going to be one of the first at this. And so there's some questions in my mind as to how much value there is of jumping ahead as Millbrae and some of the others have done. Perhaps more significantly in terms of considering a city-specific ordinance is obviously you have the one-time cost of the environmental work that we would have to do, which could be significant. But more importantly, the annual costs of outreach and enforcement. We'd obviously have to use probably the county contract code enforcement agreement, so we'd end up having the county doing the enforcement anyway, only instead of Dean's staff, it would probably be the county community development director staff. And obviously, we'd have to have provisions for things like checking the scanned bags and things of that sort. So, you know, obviously, we want to hear what the industry and the community has to say, but, you know, staff is certainly leaning towards, once again, the model ordinance approach. So with that, I'd be happy to field any questions you might have or, again, move to discussion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Moore. Questions, Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a number, so feel free to wave me off if I start going.
Just go for it all.
All right. First off, an observation. When you're doing your outreach, assuming that we authorize or staff to go forward, I really hope you will emphasize to folks that it is a single-use carry-out shopping bag ordinance change.
Okay.
Because the vast majority of retailers that I've talked to, at least anecdotally, I'll use the word tonight too, the word of the night, they view it purely as a plastic bag ban.
Okay.
In fact, several people, when I ask them, you know, they ask me if I want to have a plastic bag when I want to take my purchases out. I go, well, no, because you're going to have to get rid of, you know, you may be getting rid of them soon anyway. And they go, oh, well, I'm ready. You know, I've got my paper bags. And so they don't understand the rest of the process. So I just make that point to you.
Point well taken.
Given the impact that this has on the recycling center, one thought that just occurred to me is not the recycling center, the Shoreway Center. Is there any possibility that these kinds of bans would actually reduce Shoreway's costs and therefore show us benefit indirectly in our garbage fees?
I guess it's possible. I mean, one of the things that you'll see at Shoreway is they do have sorters who look for these bags, and they also have sort of a vacuum system where they do that. Theoretically, that could happen, although these folks are from the county's VRS program. They're not very highly paid workers, but your point's taken. It could be a slight difference.
Probably not something worth spending before we see it. One question I have every time I've read this, why are the retailers required to keep a record of the paper bags that they sell?
I think I'm going to ask Mr. Peterson to field that one.
I either asked a funny or a stupid question.
No, it's actually a question that's been asked quite a bit.
Oh.
It's a matter of making sure that it's a level playing field, that you don't have the larger retailers that are just going to give out the paper bags and say they're charging. So it's a way to keep track of it. And it's not burdensome to the businesses. As Brian had mentioned, the fact that they can scan it in, it's on the receipt, it's a simple report.
I thank you for that. I hadn't thought about that. It's leveling a playing field thing. Okay. Let's see.
Who would you like up there, Mr. Obert?
What?
Mr. Peterson or Mr. Morris?
Oh, no, that answered the question.
Okay,
Thank you.
well,
Sorry.
I'm right here, so.
Sorry about that. The draft ordinance that was in here, oh, I'm sorry, no, actually, I was looking at the wrong thing. So the San Jose ordinance, does it have any of the exception language in it that was in the styrofoam?
I believe it does have exception language, and also I believe the Millbrae ordinance has exception language as well. And also, what's interesting, by the way, in the county ordinance, and I don't recall if I mentioned it in the staff report, but the exceptions in the first draft actually are defined in the definitions, which Dean and I had some discussions about, kind of threw me for a bit of a curve. I was looking for them and I couldn't find them.
Yeah, I was a little confused on the point I was just going to make is since this is early stages, I would hope that there would be some exception process incorporated in it.
Yes.
In whatever language comes out. Yeah. And I think that's it for now.
Okay, Mr. Grisilli. Thank you, Mr. Ward.
The question I have, Mr. Moore, is we're going to, if we vote to sort of wait for the county.
Yes.
But when we do it, we're going to do it ourselves, because that's the way I thought the Manhattan Beach the decision came down. The court said it's a small enough entity that you didn't have to do the big environmental impact. But if you go in a large entity, then you're going to have to do the big environmental impact.
I'll turn to Mr. Rubens for a moment, but I believe that what we're going to do on this one is what he described earlier, which is we're going to take the county's model EIR and refer to it. Is that fairly close?
Yeah. That's correct. Councilmember Grisilli, there are two approaches. If there's a cumulative impact because it's a larger group,
right?
It seems that one interpretation of the Manhattan Beach case is that you could be required to do an EIR.
Right.
I think that's what the county is trying to address by having an EIR that's comprehensive for the whole county. The other approach is what Millbrae did. Millbrae is also using Manhattan Beach. They did their own negative deck, and that's incorporated in their ordinance that they're approving.
I just wanted to make sure that we're following that. I mean, I'm sure you're going to make sure we do, because it seemed like the bigger the item, then the larger the possibility for a lawsuit. So, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, may I take that? In fact, if we refer to a county EIR, does that potentially drag in that larger playing field and then therefore shift? In other words, it's not exactly like the Manhattan Beach situation where they just did it themselves.
Yeah, one of the findings of the court was that Manhattan Beach was too small to have a significant environmental impact requiring an EIR. But countywide, a county of 750,000 people, that argument potentially could be made. It's not necessarily will happen, but it's an argument that could be made under some of the statements in the Manhattan Beach case. So I think that's why the county is doing an EIR, as did San Jose. San Jose did an EIR for their ordinance, a larger entity, but more potential for impact.
Oh, I see. They're doing the EIR because the objection was to the negative deck.
That's right. Manhattan Beach did a negative deck.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I guess I'm taking a sort of an evolutionary approach to this. So I'm just curious. There's 14 cities in the state that have these bans now.
Right.
And any idea when the first one was enacted?
I want to say a couple years ago. I don't know if you don't know. We could research that for you. I've got it somewhere.
I'm just curious. I mean, if you had said 10 years ago, that would be...
No, I don't think so. I think it's similar to Styrofoam, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I'm guessing.
Okay.
2007, someone said.
And do you have any reports, or do these cities provide any data, San Francisco and San Jose, as to how these bans are working out so far?
I think we probably have better data from San Francisco because it's been up for a while than from San Jose, although I have had some discussions with the San Jose staff. They indicate it's going pretty smoothly, although they spent a lot of time on outreach before their effective date, and that was one of the recommendations they had for us, or had for me, was that if you're going to do one of these ordinance, have a significant transition period. They did a lot of newspaper, radio, media ads. They also, by the way, brand their ordinance a little different. They have literature that refers to it as the bring your own bag ordinance. So, kind of cute.
This may be a silly question because I can't imagine it's true. Maybe I should have reworded it, but my question was, is San Jose's ordinance stricter than San Francisco's? I can't imagine anybody's being stricter than San Francisco's.
Dean would know.
Well, San Francisco was the first city in the state to do it back in 2007, and they limited it to pharmacies and grocery stores.
Okay.
And that's currently what it is in San Francisco. They haven't expanded to retailers. So San Jose's is much stricter because of it applies to all retailers. And the reason that San Mateo County is modeling San Jose's is, again, in an effort to show that a regional effort is really what we need here. While we'd love to have this California-wide, nationwide, we realize that we have control over the small bit of unincorporated, and with the help of the 18 cities, the rest of San Mateo County.
Okay. And then I don't know if you can answer this. Maybe this will, as this process continues, I'm just wondering, again, out loud, is there a decline in single-use plastic bag use over the last few years? Is anyone measuring that?
I don't know. Is anybody?
Grocers Association has
Yeah, we'd have to apparently check with the Grocers Association. I wanted to mention, too, by the way, tagging on to your earlier question with Dean, is that when Mowbray first came forward, their first cut at this several months ago was, in fact, similar to the earlier ordinances, grocery stores and drugstores that sold groceries only, and actually watched that discussion on the internet. And what was interesting is the grocers came forward and said, we would support your ordinance if it was all-inclusive to retailers, and then other retailers came forward and said, we'd like that better too, which really surprised me. But again, I think it was one of those aha moments, and part of, I think, the value of these outreach processes with the retailers is you learn what their thinking is, and sometimes, like with this, a wider coverage sometimes surprises you that they would want more coverage rather than less.
Yeah. Just a last question. It's really more of a comment. I heard on the radio one day that there was a discussion about these plastic bags, and this one morning DJ said, wouldn't it be nice if they had a sign over the entrance to the store that said, did you remember to bring your bags? And maybe that'll be part of the outreach program.
I was just going to say, it's funny you say that, because about a year ago at the Chamber Green Committee, we actually were talking about doing what South City did, which was to start with a voluntary program and then go mandatory. And Recology, I believe it was, has such a sign and such a ad campaign from one of their other cities. I don't remember if it was San Francisco or where it was, but they literally brought it in. So that has been done, and I think it's fair to say that again, one of these little surprising moments, in talking to the Chamber's Green Business Committee and the Youth Council and other folks in town, there wasn't a whole lot of excitement about a voluntary ban. Most people in town wanted to go straight to the mandatory ban. And another anecdote, too, since that is the word of the evening, is that in my discussions with the public on bans, every time I mention that we're working on this, they immediately jump to this ban. It seems like most of the public is most interested in this topic, not the styrofoam, and maybe that's because there isn't as much styrofoam being used anymore.
Okay. And then just the last question, my mind wandered or something. We talk about this timeline that's going on. Mm-hmm. What do you see this timeline being? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months before this process concludes?
Well, I think if we want to wait for the county model ordinance, we're talking about action towards the end of the year, maybe say November, December. As far as the phase-in period, I think I'd want to wait and talk to the retailers and the public to see how much transition time they need. And also, I think we want to look a little closer at what San Jose did, because their recommendation was that this is the San Jose staff now, it's their belief that the reason it's been so well received in San Jose is because they spent so much time on outreach with the shoppers and the public. Not necessarily as much with the businesses, but them too.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Grocott.
I have no question.
Okay. We're going to go to public comment. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Okay, thank you.
I have two speaker slips, one from David Morrison and then the other from Suzanne Emerson. Mr. Morrison, you're first up.
Only one dog, no pony. Just, my name is Dave Morrison. First of all, thank you, Mr. Mayor and fellow council members, for letting me speak. I'm with Morrison School Supplies. We are a retailer of educational school supplies from preschool through junior high school. We service the teachers and schools, preschool programs, as well as parents, businesses, and others. All educational materials. We don't sell a single textbook, no backpacks, binders. It's all books and resources. We even have a lot of charts and stuff just on what we're talking about. It's a big thing in schools to promote that. And starting with our kids is really where it starts. I don't know how many of you have kids and you go around and you have a drink, you finish drinking it, you start to throw it in the garbage can. Your son or daughter goes, "Whoa, Dad," recycle that. So that's where it needs to start. Briefly, Mr. Olbert, thanks for clarifying it. It was unclear whether this type of item, plastic bag, is in that or not. You know, important thing, you need to gather a little stuff up. How do you deal with that? But if we're only talking about the carry things, I'm cool with that. We're in favor of the ban. However, we're strongly, strongly against charging our customers for the paper bags. Number one, it's really, the bags to us is a cost of our business. As a business person, we want to reduce our cost. If we can hand out less bags and deal with that, we're going to do that. We have seen an increase in people bringing their own bags. Our staff asked every person purchasing, unless it's obvious, if it's feasible for them to carry it, do you want a bag? A lot of customers, no. We have seen that come down. We would be the first one to say we want to use less bags. So I don't agree with the fact that I feel like charging is really a stick and us hitting our customers. Let's take an example of a scenario. Let's say this was enacted tomorrow. So now that customer comes in and says, "Morrison's, yesterday you paid for the bags. Now I have to pay for the bag? What's going on?" I don't believe that every consumer is going to understand this is not something that the retailer decided to do to cover their cost. I don't think that's a valid argument. I really think, because we're already paying for that. So there really is very little additional cost, if at all. In fact, I would make the argument that our costs are going down because of this ordinance. You're going to see less bags used. People are going to bring their own. And we already see that. Many of us have been in the grocery stores or other stores. We see people come in with their bags in their arms. I've talked to people who say, "Geez, I'm starting to feel guilty that I'm using all those bags." So I really think, you know, when we were talking about the styrofoam, polystyrene earlier, we haven't yet reached that 60, 70, 80%. We're not down to the 10%. And I think it's moving that direction already. It is a burden on businesses to keep track of that, to collect it. Not everybody has scanners. There's, you know, if you look around, most of the businesses are small businesses. They don't have necessarily those sophisticated systems. We do, but it's still keeping track of it. For what purpose? I don't know. Another thing is, you collect that 10 cents, what does the State Board of Equalization say about that 10 cents? Well, that's a whole other thing. I don't know what the ruling is on that. I know right now, when we purchase bags for items, those are considered non-taxable. In other words, we don't have to pay sales tax ourselves when we purchase them because they're considered part of a product, part of a service that we put through. If we start charging for that, then that becomes something we're selling. Now that's a question of what's the deal with sales tax. But anyway, my point is that I think it's really, really detrimental to make the businesses enforce that. I think people will misunderstand that. I think it's already moving that direction sufficiently as it is. We also all our products are pretty much paper-based. A lot of times people ask for plastic, like today when it was raining. It ruins a book when they walk out in the weather. Sometimes we'll actually use a garbage bag for a big chart, big bulletin boards for them. Some of them, they don't have handles typically, so I guess that's okay. Thank you very much. I hope I get included in the process as we go along.
Thank you very much, Dave. Suzanne Emerson, and then if anyone else would like to speak afterwards, please just come on up.
Good evening, Suzanne Emerson of San Carlos for San Carlos Green. San Carlos Green supports the concept of proceeding with outreach on the issue of a ban on single-use plastic bags and requiring a fee for single-use paper bags. We hope that the ban can someday, either initially or eventually, cover restaurants as well. I had heard something just last week about, I had heard that San Francisco, in reviewing their bag ban, had decided to extend it to restaurants, but something I heard here this evening was to the contrary. So perhaps I was mistaken on that. But that's something that we would like to have considered eventually, if not in the initial first round. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. Okay, it doesn't look like we have anyone else, so we'll move up to discussion. Does anyone want to start? Okay, Mr. Olbert. No one volunteers. So.
Yes, right. I guess the short of it is that I'm in favor of asking staff to proceed with, as Mr. Mora described, the outreach effort and to continue working with the county. I wouldn't personally at this point rule out doing something ourselves, but that is a less attractive option to me for a variety of reasons. And I guess the only other question I would ask, sparked by one of the speaker's comments, is now that I think about this whole issue of a little bit more about charging for paper bags, the two things that hit me are, one, we heard a reaction that indicated that if it really is designed to level the playing field, i.e. a benefit to retailers, one group of retailers not feeling harmed or disadvantaged relative to another, that's clearly something that's not clear to everybody. And so that may be something that there can be an educational component in the outreach on. And the other thing is, I just really wonder how enforceable the charge is. I mean, you know, what happens if a store sells me paper bags and then simultaneously, because I'm a great customer, they give me a 50-cent discount? Then nothing's happened. I already get the benefit of discounts if I bring in my reusable bags to Lenardi's in Belmont. That's the way they do it as part of a marketing program. So anyway, I'm happy to see this move forward. I would like to see some attention paid to it, but that's just an additional question I have after hearing the speaker comments.
All right, thank you, Mr. Olbert. Mr. Grisilli.
No, I think we should explore the studying the program and outreach.
Okay, Mr. Collins.
I agree. I think Mr. Morrison's comment is well taken. I don't know what the legal issues are surrounding that, but I think that ought to be part of this as we go along to find out what the impact of that charging that fee is on paper bag. It may be a non-issue. I don't know, but I'd like to know more about it before we proceed. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Grocott.
Well, excuse me, regarding why the tracking the bags, I had the same question. I was interested in the answer, and to me, that's this whole thing, one of the biggest objections I have to it is charging people to use a bag. I would say to all of us, before we do any of this, go test it yourself. Try living this way. Try going to the grocery store and having enough bags on hand to walk out. Like I had said before, you know, there's times my wife goes to a grocery outlet or 99 Ranch and comes home with, you know, enough plastic bags of grocery to cover the dining room table and all the counters in the kitchen. You know, I can't imagine her going to the grocery store with enough of these, whatever, you know, and she has some. I mean, she carries about 5 of those in the trunk of her car, but it's not always enough. And then to turn around and say, well, you don't have enough of those, so now you're going to have to pay 10 cents for a paper bag or something like that because you only brought enough to carry so many of your groceries and not enough to carry all of them, I think it's just not fair to folks. So I'm not in favor of tracking. I would say this to Mr. Klein's comment earlier about, you know, well, we're down to the 10%, so now we have to use the stick. Okay, I get that. We're not anywhere close to that right now, so I guess if we're going to pursue this, my inclination would be to do some kind of volunteer program. That relates again back to try imposing this on yourself and see how you like it. See if you can live that way. And then before you create a law that does it to somebody else, know what that's like to live that way. Again, I don't see this happening because I don't see enough effort here on the dais to go this route, but I really think if we're going to do something like this, just like with the other item, come up with some kind of carrot program instead of a stick program. Banning is not the way to go. And my last comment on this is, again, relates to what I said before on the other item. All this is, as I see it, this is a reaction to, we're jumping on not the bandwagon, but the bag wagon, because, there's other cities and, there's talk of this all over the state, and so we're just jumping on board. We haven't really looked at what are the issues here in San Carlos when it comes to garbage. Is it a problem? Yeah, it's a problem, just like it is probably anywhere. But have we done a survey other than, Ms. Emerson telling us about her creek cleanup or the mayor telling us about what it's like to clean up Laurel Street? I walk Laurel Street. I see what the trash is. But I don't think we have the political will to really deal with what the real trash is in San Carlos on Laurel Street, because we like the businesses that are there that are bringing in revenues to the city, and if we went in and slammed down on these coffee shops that want to give everybody a takeaway cup with the lids that Ms. Emerson was talking about on them, and we really wanted to do something that was painful, I don't see us doing it. And yet, when I walk down Laurel Street, it's the coffee cups and cigarettes. Do we want to be like Belmont and ban cigarettes in San Carlos? Maybe we should have that discussion. That seems to be when you walk down San Carlos or Laurel Street and you go in the downtown, or even just around town. I live in the downtown area, and I see some of the other streets and the trash that's there. I don't see too many plastic bags, and I don't see too many styrofoam containers. I think we need to take a real serious San Carlos tailored approach to how we deal with garbage, and we should be doing that instead of, like I say, jumping on the bag wagon with everybody else.
Okay, my only comments are, well, I'm in favor of this, and yes, I did say the 10% you can use the stick on, but you can actually use the stick whenever you feel like it. But Mr. Wilcott, I just have to point out one thing. You've systematically, for the past 2 years that I've been up here, have voted against every environmental topic we've ever had, and you have a different excuse for each one. And I mean, you're completely 100% in line with that. You always vote against them, and I give you credit. But it's a different excuse for every single one. And let's just be real. You don't believe in this environmental stewardship. You've said it multiple times. You don't believe in the certain reasons why we're doing this. And that's just the facts. So I'm in favor of going forward with this. And, sometimes a ban is the right thing to do. Sometimes it's the wrong thing to do. I believe in this particular case, a ban is the right thing to do. And again, I invite you to come to the street cleanups. I invite you to come to the creek cleanups and see how many bags we actually pull out on just an average week. These things fill up every single garbage bag we do. And yes, there are cigarettes and there are coffee containers. But let's take what we can do now and do it now, and then start working on other things. I'll go with you on a larger litter ordinance. That's fine. We're going to talk about our strategic plan retreat, but we have the ability to do this now. So let's focus on this, and not say, well, because we're not looking at these other issues, we shouldn't do anything at all. I don't agree with that at all, and I'm in favor of this.
Through the chair, I don't appreciate the personal attacks, and I do not appreciate the colorization of my character as being someone who is not in favor of the environment or cleaning things up. I just stated that I do not like to, when I drive out to 101 and Holly Street and I see the trash inside the loops there, that is just an anathema to me. It's even worse when I go down to Marsh Road to go running at the what used to be a dump site, and you pull off at Marsh Road and 101, and it's even worse. I hate seeing that. I am a steward of my environment. The one fellow talked about, what little kids do. I've got kids, And I remember when I first came in contact with my kids, because I married into my wife already had these children, and I'm walking down the street and wants to throw not recycle it, wants to throw it on the ground. And I straightened him out and said, you don't do that. You put it in a trash can. I've walked up to people, Mr. Klein, who've thrown cigarette butts out the window of their cars and picked it up and thrown it back into their car. Because you can laugh, but that's you go down Laurel Street again. What's one of the major pollutants on Laurel Street? And it is cigarette butts. And I get tired of accepting that if you smoke cigarettes, it's okay to trash your street or your town. And lastly, I'll say this. While I have not been on one of the cleanups in San Carlos, I've been on numerous cleanups. Last year when my church did Love Works, I went out and cleaned along the bay in San Mateo. I've been to beach cleanups on the coast by Half Moon Bay on 3 occasions that I can think of. So I've done this, and I've picked up trash, and I know what I've seen. It's not plastic bags. It's not styrofoam. Mostly, again, it's just like what I see here in San Carlos. A lot of it is coffee cups, glass containers from drinking tea or whatever, things like that. Yeah, are there? Plastic bags? Yeah, there's some, but I don't think that's the major source of the pollution. That's my point, Mr. Klein. That's my point is that I think for San Carlos specifically, we should take a specific approach to it, look at what our trash is, and try to come up with ways to clean that up. That's all.
Through the chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Go for it.
I'd like to make a motion to choose alternative 1, support studying a program under the Model County Ordinance and authorize outreach to retailers and residents on a potential ordinance banning single-use carry-out shopping bags at retail establishments in San Carlos.
Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Moving on to item 10B, consideration of authorizing the mayor to send letters to the San Mateo County Mosquito and Vector Control District Board of Directors and the Civil Grand Jury. Mr. Mora.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Council will recall that this topic came up at your last meeting, and there was council interest in putting it on this agenda. As the council may know from local media reports, there have been reports of some financial management issues at the Mosquito and Vector Control Abatement District. There have been some news accounts about these items. It's also worth noting that the San Carlos representative to the board, Betsy Schneider, was the one who initially asked for these records to be reviewed and led her to approaching the county council to audit these finances, and Ms. Snyder is in the audience if you wish to speak with her. There have also been press reports that 2 of the former employees of the district are now under criminal investigation for some of these matters. Staff reviewed this item with the city attorney, given that there's an active criminal investigation going on, and Mr. Rubens and I talked about potential actions that the council could take at this time. The 2 areas that we focused on is, first of all, we thought it would be very appropriate for the council, if you so decide, to send a letter to the Mosquito Abatement District supporting the actions of your representative, Ms. Schneider, and also encouraging them to continue to review their internal practices. The other action that you could take, and again, something that staff suggests that you discuss tonight, is that the council could send a public letter to the civil grand jury asking them to do a detailed investigation of the district and these financial management matters. Staff is aware that in most cases when the civil grand jury is asked to investigate a matter, it's usually done by a private secret letter. However, there's no requirement for that. And while it is not usually the practice of this council to send letters to the grand jury, staff believes that in this particular case, it would probably be very warranted given your interest in both supporting your representative in this matter and also that this seems to be a matter tailor-made for the activities of the civil grand jury. So those are my comments. I'd be happy to answer questions. Also, I would suggest that you may want to discuss this with your city attorney as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mora. Questions for staff? Mr. Olbert?
Brian, Mr. Mora, this is a question that's triggered by our earlier discussion about recology and south waste management. What audit rights, if any, do we have as a member I presume the city is a member agency, basically, in the mosquito abatement district?
I don't believe so.
No, we are, it's a taxing entity unto itself.
Oh,
but
it's a
we-
taxing
But we
entity
do,
unto
we
itself.
do appoint a member from San Carlos, but
Right.
it is a taxing authority.
Okay, but the city itself is not an entity member of this?
Correct.
Okay.
Special district.
Special district. Well, then that probably answers my question with the short answer of none. Another question I had was, do we have any insight into or what has been done in response to the problems that occurred by the district in terms of district staff? In other words, what work has already been done in terms of doing audits, outside audits? Who's done them, if any? What's been their scope?
I think most of the information that we have so far has been through the media, although again, obviously, that is another area where the council could presumably direct either their representative on the board or in your letter is ask the district to perhaps share with you some of the actions that they've taken to date. Based on some of the information that I've reviewed on this one, it would appear they have taken some steps, and I'm sure they'd be happy to share some of that with you.
Thank you. And the only other comment I wanted to make was to thank Ms. Schneider for standing up on all of our behalves, because that is not an easy situation to be in.
Okay, Mr. Grisilli?
I don't really have any questions. It's just, as long as we figure out a way to do it appropriately in a legal way, I think that's just the key thing, is making sure that we keep it in the purview of what we're supposed to be doing. I just want to overstep. It's easy to criticize and not saying that this shouldn't be under huge public scrutiny because it's a taxing authority. But I want to make sure that we stay within our purview. And just to let you know, I mean, as a former auditor, when you have collusion, it's really hard to find that. I'm serious. When you have two people doing it, if you have one person, that's why you always want to have a rotation of jobs and people take vacation. But when you have two people doing it, an auditor has a lot of. It's very difficult to identify that. Very difficult.
Mr. Collins?
First of all, Betsy, as they say in baseball, good eye. But generally, I'm in favor of sending a letter to the grand jury. I think we should do it publicly. I think that's a pretty good idea.
Okay, Mr. Grocott?
So I have a question of, I guess, process, so hang with me here. Because when I first asked for this, I was more looking at something different than what's come through the staff report. And I could see doing these things that are in the staff report, not just one or the other, but both. But the way I see this, what triggered this for me was reading some letters to the editor from the public that said, doggone it, in the private sector, something like this happens and heads roll. And it seems like, I'm paraphrasing this a couple of these letters, but the spirit of the letters were, doggone it, in the public sector, so often things like this happen, there's mismanagement, and the public's money disappears, in this case, nearly $500,000, and nobody loses a job, except maybe the people who, embezzled, obviously, but in terms of management, things just carry on. And I thought of that, and I thought to myself, what if this happened to us internally? What would be the reaction of this council if we found out that some of our employees had embezzled money to this extent? What would we do? And I know what my inclination would be, and it would relate to that man sitting over there. And that got me thinking that if we were to do something like that, if we had that kind of situation, and as a council we were to be discussing these issues, we would do it in closed session. And so I'm wondering if we wanted to, as a council, send a very strong letter to the board that Betsy sits on and make the suggestion that if this person were our manager, we would be either asking that person to resign, and if they refuse to resign, we would fire them. And that's the kind of thing I was looking for, but it occurs to me that if we were to do that and write such a letter, that we should have those discussions, not here on the dais, but over there in the chambers.
Right. And Mr. Rubens and I had some discussions along those lines about the fact there is an investigation and there's some due process, but maybe I'll defer to him to comment on that.
Well, that's it's an interesting area, and I understand the concern. I think I don't know if we would be able to have a closed session, first of all, on the conduct of another member of another agency. We're limited by employees of our agency, and whether or not there'd be certain exceptions for potential for litigation or those types of things probably wouldn't apply to that situation. But as far as where we draw the line on whether or not to write a letter to talk about the employment of someone at another agency, that's the purview of that district board, really. I think we could, as a council, you could express an opinion, but I think that's a policy decision for you. I mean, whether you want to go that far and talk about it without knowing all the facts of what's happened, what's being contemplated in that agency, whether or not there is a due process or investigation or a due process hearing that's being contemplated or underway. I think those are all questions that come to mind when I think about writing something like that. It may be, sometimes I talk about whether to issue spot, if you will, and say, well, these are issues we see. These are what we've heard in the paper. We encourage you to investigate those types of things. That's the discussion that we've had at the staff level about where you would go. And maybe part of the discussion was, contemplating how we would treat such an event here is, it's hard to say you would want to have outside agencies commenting on something while you were trying to deal with it or investigate it yourself. I think that would be very difficult. So we were kind of wrestling with those types of issues. So I think spotting the issues and identifying areas of concern, I think, is an appropriate way to go if we're going to be communicating with another agency. Because the last thing I'd like to do is have our council or our staff here interfere with an investigation or some sort of discipline that might be going on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Moore. There's no public comment that I've seen unless anyone of them. Oh, okay. Ms. Schneider, feel free to take as much time as you need. For those that don't know, Betsy is our representative on the Mosquito Abatement Board, and she is the...
Does that serve as my introduction then? First of all, I want to express my great thanks to you for your support. It's been difficult. There was a forensic audit done by Eulenberg, and the action that came out of our board meeting Wednesday night, the 8th, was that Manager Gay was placed on a performance improvement plan. And so I guess that's as far as it's going to go. So I would certainly appreciate any influence or action that you could take. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy.
My name is James Counts. I've worked for San Mateo County Mosquito and Vector Control for almost 40 years. And one of the problems we haven't had is policy and procedures. We have 2 binders full of those. The problem was the lack of implementing them. It was all there. There was red flags, and it just wasn't taken in consideration. I just wanted to make a comment on that. And I hope he would proceed with grand jury investigation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Okay, we'll start with council comments, and I'm actually going to jump to the front of the line on this one to mainly talk about the options that we have here. And Mr. Roca, I fully understand where you're coming from, and part of me wants to go there. Definitely, especially, and before I even get to that, I know it's been said already, but to Betsy Schneider, we are incredibly grateful for the service you've done to this community and the service you've done to all the communities in this district. I know it's been a very hard time for you, and I know you've put up with a lot of abuse based on the fact that you were the whistleblower on this, but I want to thank you as the mayor of San Carlos and on behalf of all the city council here for what you've done, and we'll make sure that a formal commendation will be coming as well. And thank you so much for your service. So now going to what our options are. The only thing that makes me wary about doing that, Mr. Grocott, is we are not really a member agency of the district. They collect tax money from the citizens of San Carlos, but they don't get anything from the city of San Carlos. So it makes me wonder, where do we draw the line on what agencies we can chime in on? It's essentially, say something was to happen to the south of us in Redwood City like this. Are we then going to write a letter saying the Redwood City City Council should fire its city manager? Where does it actually, where do we delineate the line of where our influence goes? And I agree where you say, well, what would happen here in San Carlos? And I would hope if something like this would happen in San Carlos, and not to use you as an example, but Mr. Maltby would be out the door the next day. I can't imagine something like this happening in our city where people were allowed to remain, and it's deeply troubling that greater action hasn't been taken at the mosquito abatement district. But I think the best use of our time is to first write a letter to the board of the mosquito abatement district, commending Betsy on everything she's done and encouraging them to further investigate and take further action, and somewhat leave that up to them. But I think more importantly is we should send a letter to the civil grand jury, and a public letter calling on them to investigate what has occurred at the district. But I also think we should call on them to investigate the way the district runs as well. And maybe it's time for there to be greater oversight, or maybe it's time for them to discuss their options on how the service is provided and leave it open-ended that way as well. Maybe the special district isn't the best way to go, maybe it is, but let them really investigate that, because you find a lot of the times in special districts, stuff like this does happen because there's a lot of lack of oversight, because people on the board unfortunately can get bullied around. It's very different than here on the city council where, you know, you're a mayor or a city council member. I know Betsy's put up with incredible abuse for doing what she's done, and I don't think that would ever happen here because we are so public. So that's where I would like to see it go, and I want to hear where everyone else chimes in. But I would encourage all the council members who haven't had a chance to meet with Betsy and hear everything that she's gone through and all the stuff that she's uncovered. It's definitely one of the things that if you took all the names of it, I would believe it could never possibly happen. It's so fanciful, but then to actually see it and to know what has occurred is really staggering and upsetting for someone for all of us who sit up here in these sort of positions. So, Mr. Olbert, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I hate it when you jump to the front of the line, Mr. Mayor, and say most of what I was going to say.
No, I don't talk that often in these meetings, since sitting in the middle, so.
Well, that's okay. You got to let it hang out once in a while. Like I think everybody up here, I mean, I was very outraged to hear what had happened there, and I agree with the mayor's comment about what would happen if in San Carlos if that were to happen here. I like the idea, too, of sending a letter to the board and also to the civil grand jury. They have two different directions. I think you spelled them out pretty clearly. The key thing for me in the letter for the board is what you said at the very end. It's very common for appointed commissioners to get easily bullied. In this particular instance, I've heard anecdotal stories about how other city councils, neighboring cities of ours, have asked their representatives to give them updates, and they get a very brief update, and when there's no further information coming and they're asked, the representatives asked why, it said, well, the director of the agency told us we weren't supposed to be looking into that, okay, or words to that effect. It's easy to get pressured, and the point of the letter to me would be to spell out the problems that are there, the possible actions that can take place, show the support that they have from other community members, and frankly also I think spell out why it's really important to the district to undertake this sort of soul searching, okay, that they ought to be looking to bring in truly independent auditors to look at some of these problems. And to your comment, Councilmember Grisilli, it is difficult to spot fraud when there are multiple people involved, but in this particular instance, I think as the gentleman indicated, and I've heard that from other places as well, the interesting thing is that nobody spotted the elephant in the room. I mean, it wouldn't have been that hard.
It's not possible. I'm saying it's hard, unless you're doing a forensic audit, like Betsy said. Forensic, you look at everything.
Right.
And when you do an audit, you don't look at every piece of paper, so.
Something else I heard, which I'm not sure, take it for what it's worth, but supposedly the audit in this instance was done also by the same firm that did the accounting for the agency, which strikes me as being more than a little conflict of interest. Okay.
3,000%.
Right. So anyway, I don't want to overplay this too much because I want to give other people a chance to make their points, but send both letters, make the letter to the board supportive, outline what the problems are, outline the important things that they can do, that they should do, and why it's in the interest of the agency to do this as well. House cleaning. They really need to be able to look there so they can stand tall in public again.
Mr. Grisilli.
Thank you, Betsy. Appreciate it. And it's hard to, I know I've sat on a number of boards, and of course, fortunately, I have a background in finance, so at least usually the numbers I can make something out of, but it's hard to do, especially if you're not getting the information, or it's glossed over, or when people are colluding. It's awfully hard. I agree with the mayor and with Mr. Olbert about how we send the letters, and I think it'd be positive in both situations to let the board know and also let the civil grand jury know that there's folks out there that are paying attention.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To me, this really comes down to, at the base of it, it's an accusation of mismanagement. And Mr. Grocott, I agree. When I first heard the story, I wanted to hang the guy by his toenails. But I don't know what I don't know. There's so much on this case that we really don't know. Maybe the director mismanaged. Maybe he was just deliberately kept out of the loop. I think this is I'm so in favor of sending both letters because we need to have a due process. And if this happened here, yes, as the mayor says, the city manager might be out the door the next day, but not before an investigation and not before due process. And that would happen in a private corporation. If there's mismanagement by a CEO or a director of finance or whatever, anybody who has supervision over people who are providing these numbers and they don't do their job, they're not let go before some sort of an organized, deliberate investigation. Because if they are, that's when wrongful termination suits happen. So I'm in favor of letting this process go forward. But I think it's really important for us as, well, we're not a member agency. We are, a taxing entity, as you say. We just need to let this process go forward and see what happens. We might be surprised. We might not. But I think it's really important to just let the process play out. Thank you.
Mr. Grocott.
Well, I hear what everyone is saying, and just with all due respect to Mr. Collins' comments about wrongful termination, that's why there's a certain amount of, I guess the word would be indemnification. Like here as a council, if we decided to let our city manager go tomorrow, we can do so just by a majority vote. We don't have to have cause. We can just decide one day that by vote of the council, we want a new city manager. And I would believe that's the case with the mosquito abatement district as well, that this guy works, it's called an at-will employee, if I'm correct on the terms. Am I correct, Mr. Rubens?
Yeah, there could be different possibilities there, but in San Carlos, we have a system where you appoint the city manager. He serves at your pleasure. He or she serves at your pleasure. Typically, there's a contract.
Sure.
The municipal code has a contract, so the contract has some provisions. In our case, that may be the case with this mosquito abatement district. And to terminating for cause under our municipal code does have a due process element to it, a closed session, and then potential for a hearing if requested. So that's what I was trying to get at. It's complicated, and there's not a it's a procedure I haven't looked at in detail. I mean, I saw the gentleman brought a couple of binders, and I'm sure there's similar processes in there, and that's what I think. We don't know what the investigation does, and I think there's a lot of if we're relying on the press for complete details of what happened, sometimes that's dangerous. So that's why I was just talking about spotting the issues and asking that the issues that we see be investigated as thoroughly as possible. I think that's one avenue you can take, and that's why the recommendation talks about the letter to the board and to the grand jury, because those are the bodies that really are charged with investigating any kind of potential for misconduct by a manager or an employee in an organization.
Through the mayor, if I can add one thing too, just for you to consider in your thinking, most at-will employment contracts would contain within them a severance clause. So, in other words, while the board, the council, could certainly terminate my contract as an at-will employee at any time without cause, that would trigger the severance clauses of my contract. And I would imagine the very last thing you would want to do in a situation where you suspected criminal or gross negligence on the part of your manager is to pay them out of severance. I think you'd probably rather go through the due process procedure, get the outcome you feel you and your jurisdiction are owed, and then terminate for cause. And I would hope that if we ever found ourselves in that situation, that that's what you would do to me. So.
And Mr. Roca, it should be pointed out that the executive director's contract is coming up for renewal, and they could choose just not to renew, and there would be no severance, or I don't believe, in that case. So there are a lot of balls up in the air at this point.
All right, well, if that's the best we can do, then that's the best we can do.
Okay, so we're going to want a motion, but can we just make sure, I imagine I'll be writing this letter with staff, that we have those couple little tweaks that I put in.
I'll make a motion that we have the mayor send letters to the San Mateo County Mosquito Abatement District Board of Directors and the Civil Grand Jury, and work with staff to make the, as you say, identify the points that we need to identify.
Friendly amendment?
Yes.
I just like to also make sure that we put in there language about making sure that they are fully aware of all the options that they can take as a board.
Okay. Sure. Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Just to add on to this last little part, I will make sure to send both of these letters on to all the mayors in the county as well, so hopefully we can get a little more pressure for the board to give them a hand in this pretty trying time. So, okay, moving on to item 11A. We are going to study session on California high-speed rail, Caltrain high-speed rail blended operations, and Caltrain electrification process. How long is this going to be, Mr. Moore?
Well, we actually, that's going to, I think, depend on, oops, not the one, how much detail you do or don't want to get into this. I do have, I can find the right presentation. This one. There we go. I actually have the baseline presentation. We also have information on phasing and costs if you want to get into that, and I even have some slides on design if you want to go there. So it's a question of how much detail you do or don't want. And I can go fast if you want to see them all initially and come back. Or
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Grocott.
Since this is a study session, I myself imagine this a little bit of, some conversation after the staff report. And if we're going to finish at 10:30, I don't see that happening.
That's what I was thinking, too.
Is there any way we can just put this on the next council agenda? I don't know what that looks like.
It's about 10:10. I don't think starting a conversation on high-speed rail at 10 o'clock at night is really appropriate.
it's not time sensitive. You're certainly welcome to continue.
Is that okay with the council? I mean, I'm just trying to get, I know this is the second time we'll have postponed this, but
We have a couple of big items on the next council agenda, including the mid-year budget, so I'm not sure that
we could hop it a month,
the
though.
very next one is the best agenda
Is it okay
for
to
it.
postpone for a month?
It would be okay if we get it in the next two.
Mr. Albert?
Yeah.
I'm fine with postponing it. Just a question of process. Are we able to have single topic study sessions at a special meeting?
And that's what I was thinking, too, is maybe, not a special meeting, but maybe we could do this as a 6 p.m.er, where we have the study session for an hour prior to the meeting,
Yeah,
and we can make it
closed
more
session.
informal.
Effectively the same thing.
So Mr. Maltby and I will work on that. We'll try to put it within the next 2 meetings or so.
Yeah, and that might work for the next meeting.
Yeah, we'll
look
cut
at
out some
that.
more time for
We'll
it.
check with your availability.
Okay. Well, with that, we're adjourned. Everyone have a good night.